Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States.
Good evening, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, welcome. I just so sidetracked because I just got the best message ever from Dazzer, and sorry, I'm gonna share it, buddy. You asked me if you should go early and then end up late. For fuck's sake. I said normal. That's me being late. So, but no, so we're joined by Digger tonight. Hello, Digger.
Hi, guys.
And hopefully Matt. I know he had some tech issues at points, so hopefully he pops in and can get everything working. But yeah, let's say hello and we'll get right into it tonight.
All right.
Hello, Digger.
Hi.
Bad Deza. What's up, AP? Hey, it's me.
Hey. Imagine that.
Hey, Shenny. Hey, Alexander.
Hi.
Hey, other Alexander. And that's what we got for the start. So
awesome.
I know you've been watching the trial and you joined me 1 week a little bit ago. Do you have anything new that you want to share before we get going? Or
Nope. Same old. Thank goodness this time it ended the right way.
Right.
All I can say. Sorry for the spoilers, folks.
Yeah, he's kind of been here, so he's probably not in prison. But
yeah, fair point.
What's up, Christine? Hey, Comer. So yeah, we'll get right into it tonight. So we have some kind of pathologist. She does bones and stuff again. Again, I think their plan for this entire trial was just throw so much at the jury that he couldn't be innocent. Like, I think that was the whole game plan from the start. So
yeah,
seemed to be
overpower them with knowledge.
Yeah. Yep. He's got to be guilty. We're throwing this much at him. Like,
exactly.
So,
yeah.
And they still haven't said anything. I believe this is the last day of the prosecution. I believe this is the last witness.
Cool.
And I haven't heard anything at all. So
no, neither have I.
So, all right, we'll get going on it.
I'm Dr. Heather Garvin.
And where do you work?
I am a full professor of anatomy at Des Moines University.
I want to go through the course of your work in this.
So another academic.
Provide me with a current CV.
I did.
And CV, kind of
a long resume, especially in academics.
Showing you what I've marked as Defendant's Exhibit 00. Thank you.
Not that I have a problem with academics, but they're all the damn same.
Your background, a little bit about your qualifications.
Yeah.
I know you just mentioned where you work, but tell the viewers what you do at Des Moines University.
So at Des Moines University, I teach anatomy to medical students, physical therapy students, physician assistant students. I also train master students in the Masters of Anatomy program doing research. And through the university, I conduct forensic anthropology casework for the state of Iowa.
Are you currently a full professor?
I am.
Let's talk about the second section here, current affiliations and appointments. And actually, let me just go up to here too, with respect to your associate professor work. That was actually.
Wait a minute, is this Diane?
Mm-hmm.
Did they rest and we missed it? Because that sounds like Diane, doesn't it? Or is it the redhead chick?
I can't tell the difference between them yet. She just sounds meaner.
Because we don't, like, that's where we ended, and that's where we ended last time. This might be a defense witness. We'll see if this is Diane.
Forensic science.
Matt's in the waiting room too.
My assistant professor.
Yes, your assistant professor. Let's go down to
You gotta, the second link I sent you, Matt, I fucked up and sent you the other show link. So the second I said, oh shit, I sent you the wrong one. And I sent you the second one. My bad, dude. I have 3 back-to-back shows tonight, so I was there you go. Now I see you. What's up, buddy?
Hey, what's going on?
See ya.
Sorry about that, man. I fucked up. I have 3 shows because I'm covering 2 launches, so I sent you the wrong link. How are you
Heather
doing?
Garvin is in the hizzy.
Is this
my
one of your witnesses?
Yes.
Okay.
This is
Okay.
the last.
Yeah.
This is the last witness. This is my board certified forensic anthropologist, Heather Garvin.
Okay.
Who yeah, and you'll have to watch it. Now that I watch it now, she did really well. She's great. She's just, she's fantastic. But when I was there at the time, I was just a little. I didn't know if she could. I didn't know if the jury understood what she was trying to tell everybody. And I think I think we've talked about this before. I mean, how is just a layman supposed to understand who's lying? There's a doctor that's up there that's lying. One of these doctors, right?
Right.
And you got to pitch which doctor is lying. I mean, how would you know?
Right. Yeah. No, it's a bad situation to be in. Matt, I don't know if you've met Digger. Digger is my other co-host.
Hey, Digger.
Sometimes.
Nice to meet you.
So Dog Bomb is not available tonight, so I grabbed Digger at the last minute. So
just to let you know, I only can spend a little bit of time tonight because I do have some things to do.
Yeah, no worries, man.
I just want to let people know I do have a YouTube station, and I do have a Facebook. Most of my material is on Facebook. Just look my name up and follow me. So that's all I wanted to let people know. I have a lot of content if you want to.
We'll drop your stuff too.
Through. I know I've got your link somewhere, so.
Oh shit! Okay, she's got it then.
It's somewhere. Yeah, I've got a long list of your stuff.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get back.
I'm always adding. Go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Your current affiliations. If you could, 2020 to present, talk to the jurors about the American Board of Forensic Anthropology.
So the American Board of Forensic Anthropology is the only certifying body in the U.S. for forensic anthropology. It's accredited through the Forensic Specialties Accreditation Board. I became board certified in 2017. There's lots entailed with that, which I can get into in a minute. But in the 2020 that you're pointing to there, I was elected on the board of directors of the American Board of Forensic Anthropology.
Let's pause there. You indicated that you are board certified as a forensic anthropologist.
Correct.
Tell the jurors what it requires to be board certified in forensic anthropology.
To be board certified in forensic anthropology, you first have to hold a PhD. Then you apply to actually sit for the examination. To apply to sit for the examination, you have to submit training logs, you have to submit letters of recommendations, you have to submit your CV, your degrees, as well as 3 case files representing the work that you have completed. And then the board of directors reviews those materials. And if they find you competent enough to sit for the exam, you can then sit for the exam. If not, they deny your application to sit for the exam.
And then tell the jurors what the exam entails.
The exam itself has a written and practical component. It's about an 8-hour exam covering all aspects of forensic anthropology.
And you indicated that you became board certified in 2017.
That is correct.
Did you become board certified and pass the test on your first try?
I did.
I know that you indicated that you're now been elected to serve on the board of directors of the American Board of Forensic Anthropology. Do you hold or are you on any committees within the American Board?
Yeah, one of the roles of being on the board, you have to serve in a number of different committees. It's a nonprofit, so it's all just volunteer work. And so my role in there, I'm co-chair of the applications committee currently. I'm also chair of the exam development committee, and I serve on the medical legal outreach committee as well.
As part of your work on the applications committee, tell us what you do.
So the applications committee is responsible for reviewing those applications that are submitted to sit for the exam. Currently, as co-chair of that, I do not have a vote in that. I'm compiling information from the committee for votes yay or nay towards those applications. But prior to serving as the co-chair on that and as a board of director, I did review case reports for that purpose.
And the case reports are submitted as part of the application process to even take the board certification exam?
Correct.
Let's move now down to 2015. I'll scoot it up so the jury can see it. 2015 with respect to your editorial board, Journal of Forensic Sciences. Tell the jury what that affiliation or appointment entails.
So I was asked to serve on the editorial board for the Journal of Forensic Sciences. It's one of the major journals in the forensic sciences, particularly in the US here. And that's because usually as academics, we'll do guest reviews of publications. All publications are peer reviewed by others. I was doing enough of those and I was doing a thorough enough job that they asked me to serve on that board, which means I get a lot more reviews to do during the year.
Let's move to your education if we can. I'll start from the bottom. We'll start at undergrad. Where did you go to undergraduate?
I went to undergrad in University of Florida.
While you were there, did you have any experience or exposure or opportunity to do any forensic anthropology lab work?
I did not do forensic anthropology lab work, but I volunteered as an undergraduate in the forensic anthropology lab there, but I was not conducting the work as an undergraduate.
You were a volunteer in the lab.
Correct.
And then where did you next go for your education?
So following my bachelor's, I went to Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania for their master's program in biological and forensic anthropology.
What was your thesis there?
My thesis was on the ossification of laryngeal structures as an indicator of age.
And laryngeal structures, point to the jury where that area of the body is.
So those are the neck structures. It's your thyroid cartilage and your cricoid cartilage. And sometimes the hyoid is kind of included in that complex there.
And when someone says, I wrote my thesis on the ossification of the laryngeal structures as indicators of age, what does a thesis mean?
Thesis is a major research project you do for your master's. You have to design it, collect all the data, analyze it, and then you present it as kind of that capstone to your master's, and you have to defend it in order to get that master's degree.
And then after getting your master's degree, where did you get your PhD?
Following there, I went to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine for my PhD.
And graduated from there in 2012.
Correct.
Let's go now to, I'm going to cycle through if we can. Page 3, let's talk about your teaching experience. Present teaching experience, talk through the jury with that.
So as I mentioned, presently working for Des Moines University, my main role there is teaching medical students. I teach them anatomy specifically. I also run a forensic osteology elective course there. And then I'm also running some master's thesis course with students doing research in skeletal variation.
And you've listed here on your resume the actual course names and numbers.
That is correct.
And then we can go down here to the courses that your teaching experience as an assistant professor. If you could tell the jurors about that work from 2012 to 2017.
And so prior to starting at Des Moines University in 2017, I was in a tenure track assistant professor position at Mercyhurst College in the Department of Applied Forensic Sciences, where I was teaching graduate students and undergraduate students specifically in forensic anthropology and supervising casework.
So now talk about some of your publications, if we can. Go to, and there's a significant number included in your resume, but I want to talk about just a few that might be related or applicable to this case. In 2020, if I can find, tell the jurors about the case studies in forensic anthropology in 2020.
So myself and a fellow board certified forensic anthropologist created an edited volume on the case studies in forensic anthropology to help in training students, graduate students, as well as learning more about what our colleagues are doing across the country. Because the more exposure you get to cases individually from different regions, the better off you are as a practitioner.
And publications in 2018 in the International Encyclopedia of Biological Anthropology. Tell the jurors about that publication, which I've marked right
I mean,
there.
I get it.
Yeah, so that's an invited publication. And so me and my colleagues that are listed there, we actually created the forensic anthropology, I don't want to say chapter, but with an encyclopedia, the label and description of forensic anthropology within that volume.
Turning now to 2016, the utility of advanced imaging and forensic anthropology. Tell the jurors about that publication.
That publication is talking about how radiographs and CT scans and MRIs can be used in casework in forensic anthropology. It's published in the Academic Forensic Pathology Journal. That's the journal associated with the National Association of Medical Examiners in Maine.
And going to 2012, developments in forensic anthropology in 2012. Describe that, please.
Yeah, so that's a book chapter specifically on age at death estimation in a volume that's the Forensic Anthropology Companion. It's kind of a text that's geared at graduate students.
Going to 2010, in your listed publications, at the top there, it has limitations of cartilage of age of death. Explain that.
So this was an extension of my thesis work. With my thesis work, I focused solely on the laryngeal structures. I then also looked at cartilage ossification in the rib cage as well for age estimation.
I want to talk now about turning to. I know we talked about there's a section in your resume for. Actually, let me go to 2008 in terms of public abstracts. I don't want to. Yes, right here.
I agree.
Looking for, give me just a second. This one right at the bottom here, with respect to the human hyoid and its relationship to the basic cranial, and I'll let you say the rest.
And mandibular morphology. Also part of my research during my master's when I was looking at the laryngeal structures, I did some studies on the hyoid bone itself. It's actually variable in its shape and size, and we don't truly understand why that is or what factors. So I was investigating whether the shape of the hyoid was somewhat related to the base of your skull shape.
And then similarly with respect to that area, in 2007,
Far more impressive
ossification again on that,
than the
that
other
same
doctor
area.
from the
Tell
other
the jurors
team.
about that work.
But the other guy,
Yeah, so
he
this was a
had
presentation. So
visual
all
aids.
published abstracts are national presentations that you
Yeah,
give
that were comically
at
large.
Academy meetings each year. They publish the abstract. You either give a poster or a podium presentation. So this was just prior to the publication of my thesis work where I was presenting it at the Academy there.
I want to turn now to your forensic anthropological casework. Tell the jurors just generally about the casework that you do at Des Moines University.
So through Des Moines University, we have a contract with the state of Iowa where I conduct the forensic anthropology cases for the state of Iowa. So if there's anything that they think a forensic anthropologist could provide additional information for to help them in their investigations, they contact me.
And below the description of that work, you have listed 2022 to 2017. What type of information is listed after each of those years?
After each of those years, I have the total number of cases that I did that year. Our case numbers always include human and non-human cases. Some of our job is just saying that, no, this is a pig bone, I'm sorry. But so I have actually stated how many of those are non-human, how many of those were full anthropological analyses with a full report. There are times that the medical examiner wants just a verbal opinion, a verbal consult. So I've included consults on there or consults from colleagues, as well as any search recoveries, external case reviews, and testifying.
And we'll get to testifying in a second, but just generally average number of case reviews per year.
For the case reviews,
Yes.
so as you can see, my casework has gone up since I first went to Des Moines University.
And so it starts at 3, and then the last couple of years you've been at 13 and 10 and 11. Does that look about right?
Correct, because usually case reviews are done by board certified individuals, and I just became board certified in 2017.
And then let's talk about your forensic anthropological casework early in your career from 2005 to 2017.
Yeah, so starting with the graduate program at Mercyhurst University is when I first really started participating in casework, doing analyses on skeletons, doing search, doing recoveries. So throughout that time, as far as human cases I was involved in, it's more than 75. That includes the time I was there as a graduate student. And then I was there for those 5 years teaching alongside with 2 other board certified forensic anthropologists.
And I'll just ask you while we're here, if you know, did you train, you just mentioned this, but did you train under board certified forensics anthropologists?
Correct. That's one of the reasons I went to Mercyhurst, that they had 2 board certified forensic anthropologists as faculty.
And if you know, does the Ohio State University have any board certified forensic anthropologists?
No.
have they had a forensic
No.
board certified
don't?
anthropologist in the last 10 or 15 years, if you know?
Not at OSU.
Not definitely not since 2005, because when I was looking at schools for masters or PhDs, I specifically looked at OSU.
We see at the bottom of this page, just with respect to your other professional services, are those the committees that you talked about earlier under the board of directors?
Correct.
That you serve on? And then moving now to same section, if we could, I want to talk about your work as a guest reviewer that you've been doing since 2012. Talk to us about that work.
Yeah, so it's a little less reviewing for each journal than if you're on the editorial board. But the way academic journals work is someone will submit an article for publication. They send it out to 2 to 3 people in the field to review. You essentially volunteer your time to review those articles and decide whether they are acceptable for publication or not. And so this is a list of the various journals that have reached out that I've done these reviews, and then not including the editorial board for the Journal of Forensic
Damn,
Sciences.
CV is a book.
Tell us about your co-chair work on the validation committee.
So my first year on the board of directors for the American Board of Forensic Anthropology, I was co-chair of the validation committee. So all questions that go into our question bank for our exam are rigorously validated by a number of people before they can even go in that question bank.
Further down, 2019, it's listed a book review of forensic anthropology. Tell us a little bit about that.
That is correct. The publishers for that book reached out to me and asked if I'd be willing to read through and do a review of that textbook.
Turning now, if we could, to 15, 16, and 17, the co-instructor work that you did. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Mercyhurst University, they teach graduate and undergraduate students throughout the year, but every summer we have short courses where you might get, wannabe students, graduate students, law enforcement, other people that want additional training in forensic anthropology, either in the search or recovery or analysis of those remains. And so as faculty there, I was co-instructor for those courses.
And
Humans
going
coming on a
down,
Rising Star
to
Cave in South
2013
Africa.
to the 3-day course that you
Trying to
did
read.
there. Tell us about that.
Correct. Myself and my
No
then colleague,
muffins
Dr.
this time,
Stevenson,
Ozzy.
went down and
No
conducted a 3-day
muffins.
skeletal trauma course in Chile. Again, just going over what skeletal trauma is, our
Possibly.
experience in it, the features of it.
You mentioned Stephen Sims. Who is he?
He was one of my advisors during my master's at Mercyhurst University, and then my colleague when I was teaching there.
And is he a board certified forensic anthropologist?
He is.
Now we'll have to the page is split, but 2007 with a short courses at Mercyhurst College, and the list begins right here at the top of the page.
Yeah, so as a graduate student, you were expected to work in those short courses. You basically, your life was school and learning forensic anthropology and then teaching others forensic anthropology.
Then the next section of your resume goes into, I believe, lectures. You ready about that?
They're invited talks.
Invited talks.
I give lectures every day as part of my job that are not invited talks.
Fair enough. Doing a trial is like an invited talk too. Invited talks. We'll just start right from the first one in 2022, Forensic Anthropology Introduction. Tell us about that.
So the Midwest Death Investigation course had contacted me and asked me to give a presentation there about forensic anthropology. Most of the audience members were medical examiners from Iowa or death investigators from Iowa.
And going down to 2019, invited lectures. I know we're still on. 2019, the role of forensic anthropology in medical legal investigations. Tell us about that.
Again, this is an invited lecture. Given my expertise in forensic anthropology, they reached out, the Iowa division of the International Association for Identification, and I gave that lecture there.
2018, with respect to invited lecture invitation that begins with forensic anthropology. What did you do there?
That was a talk at the Iowa Association of County Medical Examiners, again, explaining what forensic anthropology is, what we can contribute on the casework.
And somewhat related to this case, we'll go to the next page and talk about the invited lectures in 2014, 15, and 16.
Again, they're invited lectures. So 2014, 15, and 16, the one that says forensic taphonomy and bone trauma analysis. Through Mercyhurst, we would put on the Pennsylvania Coroner's Basic Education course yearly, where we go and teach corners about forensic anthropology and our expertise. The other ones, again, they're invited lectures, teaching individuals about what forensic osteology is, or sometimes even the public, to make them more aware of what a forensic anthropologist is, what that career looks like, and what that role is.
Oh, come on, you just got to go watch
We'll end
Bones.
here with your academic memberships.
Yeah, so as an academic, you usually belong to one or two academic memberships. And so I belong to the American Association of Physical Anthropology. It's now American Association of Biological Anthropology. They've changed their name with the time, where I'm a full member there. And then the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the anthropology section. I've been a part of that since 2004, and I'm a fellow within that organization.
Is there any difference between someone that says I'm a member and I'm a fellow?
So you have to be promoted from member to fellow, and that means you have to go to a certain number of meetings each year. And then I believe you had to submit a couple of research articles showing your involvement in the field, or case files showing again that your expertise in that field.
Seem to be fair and accurate.
Matt said she's board
Yes.
certified. No one from the prosecution was.
Two last questions with respect to your
Yeah, I remember that
experience
point being
as a
made.
witness testifying.
And a lot of them seem to be academic. She seems to actually have done shit.
And in those,
So.
how many times?
Yeah.
5 times.
And in
This
those,
will be the 6th. Sorry.
and in those instances, were you tendered or offered and qualified as a forensic anthropologist?
Yes.
Of those 5 cases prior to today, were they criminal cases?
Yes.
How many of those
Good.
5 times did you
She's only
testify
done
for the
5.
state?
For the prosecution, all of them.
Your Honor, this time I would tender this expert as a board certified forensic anthropologist.
No objection to the forensic anthropologist.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Dr. Garvin, I've left a report up on the that bar there for you. If you need to use it to refresh your recollection, just let us know. Could you flip through it though, so that I can mark it as an exhibit, and let me know if that appears to be a fair and accurate copy of the report that you rendered in this case?
It does.
I want to marking Dr. Garvin's report as Defendant's Exhibit TT. Just want to
TT?
go through the report in all
TD.
15 of 15. Does that appear to be
Correct.
accurate? Because it is page numbers, I'll
We're
just refer
children.
to page numbers as we go, unless the report's in front of you. Just as a matter of background, how did you first get involved in this case?
So on September 3rd of 2021, I was contacted by Court Gatterdam and asked if I'd be willing to do a review of case materials as a forensic anthropologist.
And how, if at all, do you know Court Gatterdam as being part of the defense team?
At that time,
Yes.
none.
He's my co-counsel. That's what I mean.
Yes.
Do you know him as that?
Yes.
And so he reached out to you. And the scope of the request from Mr. Gatterdam, is that included in the first paragraph there in your report?
Yes.
And tell the jurors what you were asked to do.
So I was asked to review a number of reports and provide my opinions based on my forensic anthropology expertise. And so those reports are bulleted there. Do you want me to go through them?
Let me go. When you say bullets, there's a list right there of materials that you reviewed. Were those materials provided to you by Mr. Gatterdam or a member of the defense team?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
sit down and
you've listed
relax.
those as
Be all right.
Can you tell the jurors what those are?
So the first bullet is a forensic anthropology report submitted by Dr. Vidoli at the University of Tennessee.
Hi, Shane.
The second is a forensic anthropology
down and
report
relax.
submitted by Dr.
Okay.
Amanda Agnew and Ms. Harden of the Ohio State University, dated to the 11th of January, 2021. Then I have a Montgomery County, Ohio coroner report on the postmortem examination of Emily Noble. Then I have an addendum to the forensic anthropology report submitted by Dr. Angela Harden of the Ohio State, dated to the 10th of May, 2021, and a written review of case materials authored by Dr. Smock.
The last material that you reviewed, through the work in this case, you're familiar now with Dr. William Smock.
Yes.
If you know, is he a anthropologist?
No.
Is he? And then sort of the next question, also not a board certified or forensic anthropologist then?
No,
Is he a pathologist?
not to my knowledge.
Did you,
Seeing anything.
when Mr. Gatterdam
Nope.
reached out to you,
He's a cop,
asked for you to do the work that's identified on your report,
right?
did he, in advance
Yeah.
of you doing that
Yeah.
work, tell you or guide you in any direction as to what the defense wanted you to say?
Objection, Your Honor, as to the
Well, it's introductory. I'll permit you to say yes or no.
No, and I don't recall, but I would imagine I might have even responded and said that I'm willing to do this. You don't know what you're going to get out of it, but
Did you obviously do the analysis in this case? and ultimately come to some findings and conclusions with respect to your work?
So the word analysis in this case is referring it to the actual review of these materials. It's not a case report as if I sat down with the skeleton and wrote out a forensic anthropology case report.
And so based on your review of the materials that you've listed here in bullet points, did you come to findings and conclusions in this case to a reasonable degree of medical or scientific certainty?
Yes.
And are those summarized in the initial paragraph in your report?
Yes. The bulleted points at the top are points of the review, kind of the major points of the review for the critiques or refuting points.
And if you could go through them, let's start with the
I
first
kind of want to
bullet
hear
point.
the state crosshair because I feel like they're just
Finding
going to
bullet point.
just blow it.
So it says perimortem fractures to the
they
hyoid
do
bone
pretty
and
good,
ossified
actually,
thyroid
Maggie.
cartilage. Hanging
Do
cannot
they?
be ruled out
Oh.
as a
Yeah,
possible
they do.
mechanism to these fractures.
I want to pause there and talk about perimortem, if we could. Perimortem, define that period of time, if you can.
So perimortem, although generally means at or around the time of death, it means something different for forensic pathologists doing the autopsy and anthropologists. As anthropologists, we don't have the soft tissue to work with. And so all we can tell as far as a fracture occurring at or around the time of death is that it occurred in fresh or biomechanically fresh bone, meaning that it still has, it's still hydrated, still has this collagen and protein and elastic properties. So that can be, if it's a few days before, we may not see any signs of healing. It could be days after, weeks after, sometimes months after. I think it's even documented to be years after at times.
A year. She just said up to a year.
Antemortem. Could you define antemortem for us?
So anthropologically, we would determine that a defect is antemortem if it has gross or visual signs of healing to that bone.
And then going on the other end, postmortem damage.
So postmortem damage would have no signs of healing, obviously, and it would appear as if it happened in dry bone. So it's not happening in that more elastic bone. Sometimes that will be more jagged, more angular, and sometimes it'll be lighter in coloration because it wasn't exposed to the environment as long as the perimortem fractures.
I mean, I'm interested in what
Pause
she's
there.
saying. Like, she does a good
You
job on the stand, really.
Listed in your report on page
Yeah, she just got done with her credentials.
715, a number of
She's
citations.
really going to get into
Do you recognize that?
explaining.
Yes.
Well, the main
And
one
before
is that
you
those
came to
injuries
testify
to her
today,
face
I,
don't exist.
Approach you with
Okay.
a
Compelling.
stack of the printed out copies of the listed citations that you've referenced in your report.
Yes.
And did you have an opportunity generally just to talk to me about the number of citations? And would it sound about right that there was 19?
I heard the whole question, but why don't you rephrase it?
Sure. The number of citations in your report.
I have 13 citations in my report.
And in one, I want to go back to to your description of post-mortem damage, if we could. One moment.
Yeah, this woman saves my life, man.
Yeah, she seems like she's on, man.
Oh, it's in there.
Yeah, wait
What's
until
going on?
she explains everything to you. It's really quick. It's not that long. It's like,
Well,
it's literally like, oof. The Agnew lady is just, she was unqualified. She wasn't
Yeah.
board certified anything. She was just a, some sort of a bone doctor, but she definitely wasn't a forensic, and she definitely wasn't board certified. So,
right. No, and so when I was watching through it before we even picked to do it, and that's been a while ago now. But when I was watching through it, I was really curious because when you watch it on the site, the Law and Crime site, the comments still come up. So the chat
Right.
still comes up on the side.
Right.
And I saw the whole time them calling you, evil bastard and
Right.
whatever
Yes,
the
yes.
worst things they could.
Right.
And then after this doctor, everything switched and they're like, yeah, this is ridiculous. So I'm really curious to see it again so I can
right. See what
catch
she
what's
says
going on.
exactly. Yeah, I've seen it so many times that I've kind of I have it down. You know what I mean, for research for my book. Yeah, she
Right.
really does a job, man. I mean, she tells you why that the Agnew report is not credible. It's not.
Oh.
And isn't it scary that they put people like Agnew on the stand and get convictions, man? You know what I mean? If it wasn't for this lady, if I didn't have any money to get this lady, I'd probably be in prison. Yeah,
Right.
It's bad. It's bad. Academians, like you say, academians,
Yeah.
they're just as bad as the cops. They got ego problems, right?
Yeah. It's all system and narcissists.
Right. And
Hardcore.
everybody was from, and of course she was from OSU.
Yeah.
Which wasn't a mistake. Of course she was from OSU. because you know how they give about the they're tribalistic. So
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah. But all right, we'll get back into it because I'm
All right.
interested.
yeah, just listen to it. It's awesome, dude. It's
Yeah.
something else. And Diane understands all of it, bro. Like she
Okay.
she understands all of it. It's amazing.
I just feature pages.
Yes. I'm finding that. So circling back to your report, I'll find that literature with respect to postmortem damage in a second. But the second finding, as noted in the second bullet point, is what?
No evidence of perimortem fractures to the craniofacial region.
Tell us
None.
what the craniofacial region means.
Craniofacial region means the bones of the face in this general area.
No injuries
And
to her
while we're
face.
on sort of the anatomy, if you will, and I have your permission to ask you this. How tall are you?
I'm 5'4 3/4.
If you
Me
could,
too.
Show the jurors
Hey.
just generally where hyoid is and then the thyroid cartilage.
Yeah, so the easiest way to understand the anatomy is to explore your own anatomy, right? And so your Adam's apple here that you can feel, that's your thyroid cartilage, and you can feel it wrapped
Same
around
thing
the
I was
side.
thinking.
Just below that is the cricoid cartilage. It's a ring-like cartilage just underneath that. And if you follow your Adam's apple up, and there you'll feel a little space, and then you feel another bone right on top of that. That's your hyoid bone, and you can feel the greater horns of your hyoid on the side. I just always warn people, don't squeeze too hard.
But
God forbid.
so going back now,
Where?
because there was this issue earlier showing you what's
It
been
might have
marked
been-
as
I-
Exhibit
the doctor.
BB for defense. I think this was one of the materials included in that were included in your citations. Do you recognize this?
Correct.
And where is this two-page piece of literature from?
So those are 2 pages out of the textbook Forensic Anthropology, Current Methods and Practice by Christensen et al.
And with respect to this paragraph right here, summarize, if you could, what it says with respect to post-mortem fractures or damages you've talked about.
It says that fresh bone fractures or perimortem fractures will lack evidence of healing or infectious response, and that they are often straighter, where dry bone, those post-mortem damage, tend to have a more jagged appearance.
Going back to your report, then at Defendant's Exhibit TT, the third finding, if you could talk about that.
Antemortem trauma to the nasal bones and maxilla.
Going back to the anatomy, if you could show the jury nasal bones, maxilla, and the rest of that nasal structure.
Right, so you have your nose, which the part that's projecting outward is cartilaginous, which is why it moves. If you push backward, you can feel where the nasal aperture, that bone ends, is a teardrop shape. You have a little bone projecting out here, your anterior nasal spine. Your actual nasal bones are the small ones up at the top here, pinched. And then on the sides here, this is all your maxilla, and your maxilla actually includes that top part that has your teeth in it as well.
And then the opening of the nose is called what?
The nasal aperture.
And, in preparation for your testimony today, did you provide some pictures of nasal apertures?
Yes.
Marking these as Defendant's Exhibit PP. We'll show them on the screen.
Ha.
Paul, Paul.
No objection.
Dr. Garvin, tell us what we're seeing here with these 3 images.
So I did a quick Google search, just nasal aperture human skull, to provide examples of what a nasal aperture really looks like, since most people have not really seen them in their lives. And so you can see these are educational images where they're outlining where that nasal aperture is, where the anterior nasal spine is, that's just below it there. And one of the primary things that's illustrated here is the amount of variation there is in that nasal aperture and how that aperture can be irregular.
These 3 pictures, are these
I'm thinking the
nasal
same thing,
apertures
Linda.
that
She's making it really easy
suffer
to
trauma,
understand.
or are these not?
Yeah.
This one down here might have some antemortem trauma. I can't really tell on that. But otherwise, no, because they're teaching specimens. So they wouldn't have a perimortem trauma teaching specimen.
And the differences, if you could just show us perhaps a few differences between this image and this image to illustrate your point with respect to these.
Yeah, so you have the nasal aperture here, and you can see, I can't do it too thin. You can see that there's just, if you follow those borders up, there's irregularities along the way. Essentially what's happening here is bone is kind of coming to a point where the cartilage then attaches to it and comes out. It's not joining with another bone, so you don't have a nice joint there per se. And then the nasal bones here, we can see there's variation here. And even in the drawing for a textbook, you can see that they've even captured some of that variation in the drawing as well.
Thank you. Did you pull additional images with respect to the nasal aperture?
Yes, well, one of the things we teach is human variation, right? We're variable. So I didn't want it to seem like I just picked 3. So these were 2 additional ones showing nasal apertures. Again, from common internet searches, and even areas like this, you can see are irregular. It's a sharp margin. A little bit of irregularities there along that margin aren't any consequence to you.
And that second image will be part of defendant's exhibit PP, Paul. Thank you. Let's turn to back to your report, if we could. With respect to the fourth finding, begins with potential.
So I put there a potential area of slight postmortem damage to the left lateral nasal aperture.
Tell us why you would put potential in your report.
I put potential in my report because looking at the images, that certain area looks lighter in coloration. And when I compared it to seeing photos, it looks as though a little piece might have chipped off. But I don't feel that I can say that definitively. So I put the word potential out there.
Now, let's report if we can, and then we'll circle back with respect to the findings and conclusions. Are you familiar with Dr. Agnew's report?
I am.
And we'll start with, in her report, does she describe the processing, how she processed the bones in this case?
Yes, she gives a 5-step, which are each numbered process for processing the remains.
And are those 5 steps listed under the description of remains in your report?
They're not listed word for word. For example, when I say an undisclosed amount of time, that's because her report didn't say the amount of time. But I paraphrased them there.
And so let's talk about the undisclosed amount of time with respect to the hydrating process. Can you describe what the hydrating process is?
I've actually never heard the term hydrating process before. Mummified tissue can be very tough to get through. So it sounds as though soaking them in the water would loosen that material. It's a form of maceration. So maceration just means breaking down by liquid. Most of the time as forensic anthropologists, when we're macerating, we're actually using a little bit of heated water. But in this case, they were in a tub with water, I think to loosen that soft tissue to get it off.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike the last part of that answer as it calls for speculation. She indicated she's not familiar with the term and doesn't know what Ohio State did. She's really guessing this.
Response to that?
Is it indicated in Dr. Agnew's report the temperature of the water as part of the rehydrating process they used at Ohio State?
It's paraphrased there. The first time she does say room temperature, and then in that 4th step she says warm water.
So let me clear this here. It's room temperature and warm water. Do you see those?
Correct.
And when you after the number 2, why is rehydrating in quotes?
Because I had not heard of that as a process.
And rehydrating, is that a term that you're familiar with as a forensic anthropologist?
No.
And then with respect to the third part of the process, the manual removal of soft tissue, could you describe that?
That's a typical part of the process when we have remains, right? As forensic anthropologists, we'll look at the remains with the tissue to see anything there, but then we want to see the actual skeletal surfaces. So we need to get those materials off. So there are processes to loosen the soft tissue, but at some point you have to actually manually use tools to try to get some of that off.
And let's go to, and then we're the 4th part of the process.
Is the judge just not going to rule on that?
Soaking the elements in a warm water detergent solution. And again, the report didn't say the amount of time.
And why is that something that you noted in your report?
It could be weeks, it could be months. I don't know exactly how long those remains were sitting in water. And if you have remains sitting in water for a prolonged period of time, it can affect the integrity of the bone.
In your work as a board certified forensic pathologist,
I'm not a pathologist.
I'm sorry, anthropologist. How would you document, or would you document the time intervals when elements are being immersed in water?
I would at least mark down the start date and the end date.
Let's go to number 5. Tell the jurors what's the 5th part of the process that Dr. Agnew reported doing.
So she reported submerging the elements in a 1-to-1 ratio of water and 2% hydrogen peroxide for 24 hours.
What is your, based on your expertise, training, and experience, what are your observations about that part of the process?
You should not be using hydrogen peroxide in forensic cases.
Showing you what has been
shit.
marked as defendant's MM. And before I do that, with respect to the fifth part of the process, there's Fenton 2003, Stedman 06. Tell us what those names and numbers mean.
So whenever you see my report, parentheses and the name and number, that's a citation. It's referring to an article that supports that statement. We do that in science a lot because anytime you're drawing conclusions, you don't want someone to just take your word on it. So you're providing that supporting evidence from the literature for that statement.
Showing you what has been marked as defendant's MM. Email materials.
They're just dismantling
Showing you, let
the
me
entire
zoom out
state's
so you can
case.
see the
And it's
document.
beautiful
Dr.
to
Garvin,
watch.
do you recognize this?
Yes.
And tell the jurors, if you could, what is it?
So this is a document, something we would call a SWIGANTH document. SWIGANTH stands for the Scientific Working Group, in this case, the Subcommittee of Forensic Anthropology. This is a group that was put together originally kind of by the DoD and the FBI to create some written standards or best practices for the field.
If we can, and is this the most current version?
So the SWIGANTH documents, this is the most current version of the SWIGANTH documents. It's now been rolled over into another organization, OSAC and NIST, and the ASB as well. There's a lot of acronyms where they are redoing all of the standards, and some of them are completed, some of them aren't.
So let me go to page 2 of 3 with respect to unacceptable practices. 5.0. If you could tell us what 5.0 is, please, in terms of unacceptable practices.
It says use of chemicals that damage or destroy bone or DNA. For example, bleach, hydrogen peroxide, and formalin may be used in some situations, but the destructive consequences and personal health risks of the use of these chemicals must be recognized.
In this case, we talked about, well, were the best practices as indicated by defendant's exhibit MM used by Dr. Agnew in this case with respect to processing?
Objection, Your Honor. In calls for speculation, she said she was not familiar with what Ohio State did.
She's not familiar with what?
With what Ohio State did. She said there's words in the report that she doesn't know what they mean. She hasn't followed up. She doesn't know what Ohio State did other than what she read.
Rephrase your question as to this
Sure.
process, if you will.
Let me just go back to the description of the remains. You reviewed Dr. Agnew's report?
Correct.
And in the fifth, number 5, process, that part of your report, where did you get that information from?
From her report.
And it is described in your report under 5 as what?
I'm not following the question.
What does it say in your report after the number 5 in a semi? Or
It says submerging the elements in a 1-to-1 ratio of water and 2% hydrogen peroxide for 24 hours.
is the 24-hour period described in any way within Dr. Agnew's report?
It's described as written.
And then that takes me back to what I just showed you with respect to defendant's exhibit MM. Based on Dr. Agnew's report as to the fifth part of her processing of the remains, were the practices in compliance or not as listed in 5.0?
Hydrogen peroxide was used and there was no indication to the destructive properties of it in the report.
Tell us why hydrogen peroxide might be a destructive property.
It's a bleaching agent, so it'll turn the bone
They
white.
bleach the bones.
Look nice, but we don't need them to look nice in a forensic case. And unless the remains are rinsed off very well afterwards, actually peroxide can continue to process those bones even afterwards.
And what might that
There's
do
color
to
issues,
the
there's
bones
coloration
themselves?
issues.
So there's reports that using hydrogen
bricks.
peroxide will impact receiving DNA. From
They
the
bleached them
remains.
all white.
Also
Yeah.
exfoliation.
If they were there to begin
so
with.
bone kind of flaking away at muscle attachment sites.
Tell us, and going back to your report, you've listed there the Stedman article from 2006. Tell us how, if at all, the process used by Dr. Agnew, the 1-to-1, differs or same, similar, or otherwise to the Stedman article.
So the Stedman
Kind of
article
one, I
actually
think.
used experimental procedures to look at different types of processing and their effects on DNA amplification. One of the methods they did experiment with was hydrogen peroxide. In the Stedman article, they did do that over a period of 30 days because it took that long for the tissue to come off just from soaking in the hydrogen peroxide. It was used at a 1 to 9.5 ratio with 3% hydrogen peroxide.
And if you recall the ratio that was used in this case,
It's a 1-to-1 ratio of water and 2% hydrogen peroxide.
and so if we
A lot of
compare the
peroxide.
ratio in Stedman
Yeah.
versus the
Holy
ratio in
shit.
this case, how do they compare?
It's approximately 10 times stronger.
10 times stronger in this case?
Correct.
Let's go
At
now
least.
to your section with respect to, it's
It's a
titled
lot of
absent
peroxide.
skeletal elements. Tell the jurors if there was any skeletal elements that were absent based on your review of the materials and the photographs in this case.
Yeah, so going through the report, I was going and reviewing all aspects of the forensic anthropology report. And so one of the first aspects in the reports is somewhat of an inventory. What remains did you have available? What remains were missing? And I found a few discrepancies between what was written there, what was shown in pictures and photographs that I had that I reviewed, as well as an addendum report that showed up.
And that's a perfect way of going back to the first page. I know I asked you about the materials you reviewed. In this paragraph right here that says, following a preliminary review, what, if any, additional materials does it say that you reviewed as part of your work in this case?
Yeah, so once I read through the reports that were given to me, I requested additional photographs to conduct my review.
And how many photographs did you review and where were those from?
From the defense, I received 9 folders containing 432 photographs of the scene, autopsy, and anthropology photographs.
Wait a minute. She looked at evidence?
Yeah.
Going back to the
They do that?
with
Apparently.
respect to
You have credibility.
absent skeletal elements. I don't think you listed for
Crazy.
the jurors, what was missing? Was anything missing?
So one thing to note was that I saw in the scene photographs that both sneakers were there and the feet were still inside the sneakers. And then there was a radiograph, which is an x-ray from the medical examiner that showed the left foot still in that sneaker. And I could see that the bones to the great toe, your big toe, were there in that radiograph, but they were listed as absent in the anthropology report and were not in the picture of the overall skeleton laid out.
So somebody did a shitty
When
job.
you say the picture of the overall skeleton laid out.
Really shitty job.
Let me pull it if I can. That was in Dr. Agnew's report, is that right?
Correct.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 130. Page 2 of 10. Is that the depiction that you just testified about?
Correct.
Could you show the jurors, circle what you just described?
So this would be the left foot down here, and there's the left great toe. There's a metatarsal there, which is kind of the sole of your foot, but the actual digits that would be after that are absent.
Bodies always look so fat
And-
when you lay out the bones like that.
Otherwise absent.
they look
Anything
funny,
else
don't
noted
they?
in your report?
Yeah.
There were also inconsistencies with the dental, with the teeth present and the teeth that were recorded as being sent off for DNA.
Why would you, in your report, address inconsistencies in reporting?
Because it's about accuracy. I mean, the inventory is the first thing you do, what bones are there, yeah.
Showing you, while we're talking about inventory, what I'll mark as Defendant's Exhibit NN. This isn't a picture we've seen. So, Dr. Garvin, do you recognize this picture?
I do.
And was this one of the 432 pictures that you reviewed in this case?
It was.
Tell us, and is it easier if I orient
Yes.
the picture this way?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, yes. Tell us if you could, I'll zoom in, identify some of the things that you see in this photo.
Your
So this
discretion.
photo, I go through them
I just
sequentially.
realized it was-
So this was after the remains had arrived at the anthropology laboratory. They arrived and some elements were in different labeled plastic bags. And then this picture follows where there's a number of elements. So we have some hand elements. We have the mandible here. This is your first.
Okay, so if you
vertebrae
bleach
right
the
here.
hell out of that, it's
Some
completely
feet
different than
elements
the
as
way
well.
you found it.
And zooming in,
Yeah.
I noticed that this
Like-
was the
I was
highlight
just
right
going to
here.
say, is this, they haven't been
This
bleached
picture,
yet, have they?
No,
Is this
No, that's
before
how they found them,
processing or
so-
after processing? Where is this in that stage?
This is before processing.
Yeah.
As you reviewed this picture, you've just circled what you have identified as the hyoid bone. In this picture or in any other picture pre-processing, did you see the thyroid cartilage?
No.
have you looked for the thyroid cartilage in that photo and every other photo that you reviewed in this case pre-processing?
Yes.
Is there a photo freestanding of the hyoid bone pre-processing?
Yes.
Is there a photo pre-processing of the thyroid cartilage?
No.
Next page of your report, 3 of 15. I noticed there are places in your report where you seem to say things such as, I have no concerns or comments about this section. Why would you include that type of language in a report?
So that you know that I did at least look at that section, even though I don't have any comments for it.
Holy
Let's go to
shit,
the
more
next
credibility.
section with respect to, actually, we'll skip to age at death. Tell us the process that, based on your review of Dr. Agnew's report, that she used to determine the age at death of the remains.
So she looked at the pubic symphysis, which is one of the age indicators that we will use in forensic anthropology. It's where your pelvis kind of comes together in the front, and it goes through some predictable changes with age. And so she looked at that and applied the Brooks and Suchi 1990 method, where you kind of compare that to a number of phases and came up with a phase 4 for that. And so she gave a range based on that.
And does that range, if you know, include the true age of Emily Noble?
It does not include the age that's on the body labels.
Did she use more than one method to assess the age at death?
Based on a report, it only says that one method was used to come up with this age range, age interval, I should say.
She didn't
And with
need to
respect
have,
your
or
work
she
as a
didn't
board
have
certified
to.
forensic anthropologist,
They knew who
what
she
is
was.
your practice with
Right.
respect to determining
Why do
age
work
at
we
death?
don't need to?
Well, especially when you have a full skeleton, right? You want to use all the tools that you can. So there's other areas you can look at for age estimation, like the sternal ribs, the auricular surface of the pelvis, cranial sutures. So when we're doing a case, we want to apply different methods and see where all of them come out. And then from that, you have your final estimate. And for each of those, there are methods that have the statistics that follow it. We would report for each of those a 2 standard deviation wide interval.
I think she's just trying to say that everything she did,
Was that done in
the
this
other
case?
doctor did was
No.
shit. Even that.
Or didn't bother
Go
doing.
to, I'll
Right,
toggle
right.
back and forth. I'm showing you now Dr. Agnew's report with respect to ancestry. Same question about ancestry. Your practice, using one method or more than one method is your standard practice.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance. Ancestry relevance.
I'd be
well,
inclined
it's
as a
in
juror
evidence,
to
right, for
believe
ancestry?
this chick anyways, just
So I
because
think we
she
can talk
seems
about
more
ancestry. I
capable.
believe it has, whatever
Yes,
relevance
she
the
does.
jury finds it to be. I'll agree with that. Go ahead.
Just best practice, one method or more than one method in looking at the determination of ancestry.
More than one method, and specifically, usually we'll do morphoscopic, so non-metric traits, which were scored in here, but also metric analyses.
And I'm showing you page 3 of 10 of Dr. Agnew's report, marked 130. Based on your review of her report, what method did she use?
She used the ASA method. It's optimized sum scores attributes. It's a method that was developed where you score a number of features, particularly of that nasal aperture region that are known to kind of have higher frequencies in certain ancestries. And then based on the sum scores of those traits, you can estimate whether those morphologies are more consistent with a white or European ancestry individual or Black African-American ancestry individual.
Did she use more than one method or just the one?
One.
If based on your training experience and review of the literature, do you have any
Yeah, that's pretty
observations or
much. She's
thoughts
just saying
on
she
the
was
use
subpar,
of the
didn't
method
do
that she did use with respect to ancestry?
most of the things that she should have.
This was addressed previously, I believe, with the prior witness, so I think this is expert testimony, talking about expert testimony, a topic that's been made a part of the record already.
So given that the one method that was used here relies on features like nasal bone contour, I would have been cautious about using it if there's antemortem trauma there or if there was any kind of trauma there.
That leads us to the next section that we'll talk about in your report, the trauma section. If you recall, how many pictures were in Dr. Agnew's report documenting facial trauma?
I don't recall. I didn't count them.
If I may approach, Your Honor. show you. Would it refresh your recollection to see the report?
Oh, in the report? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I thought you meant all the individual photographs.
No. Just in her report.
It would help still to,
Sure.
to. So there are 8 figures in her report.
And with respect to facial trauma, how many photographs are in her report with respect to the face?
There is 1 figure composed of 4 photographs.
Let's go through those 4 photographs now if we can. I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 139. Do you recognize that as one of the 4 photographs?
Yes.
Tell the jurors about plastic deformation or deformation.
So plastic deformation a lot of times is an indicator for perimortem blunt force trauma. Essentially, when you have a load applied to the bone, right, the bone has a little bit of elastic properties to it. And so those elastic properties will allow slight deformation, slight strain, like 3%, some of the articles indicate. And if you were to stop applying that force, it would just go back to the way that it was. You wouldn't know any different until it reached to a certain point, a yield point. And at that time, you're getting bonds broken. And once that pressure is relieved, it will not go back to the way it was. That's plastic deformation. If you were then to continue applying force, that's when you get failure for that fracture.
What, if anything, do you recall in her report that Dr.
hate
Agnew
that question.
circled or noticed about this photograph?
In one figure, there was a blue circle encompassing the entire nasal aperture that the caption indicated was displaying plastic deformation.
And the nasal aperture, if you could encircle it for the jurors.
That's the nasal aperture.
Before I ask you some questions about this, at any point in time in this case, did you see the actual bones?
No.
Have there been cases where you've been asked to review photographs and the photographs were not sufficient for your review?
For my external reviews?
Yes. And in those instances, what have you done?
I indicated that in my external review that given what I had, I couldn't make a determination on this timing of the fracture.
The photographs that you were provided of the 432 photographs, were they of sufficient quality?
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Rephrase your question.
Did you need to see the bones themselves to render the finding and conclusions in this case?
Any conclusions that are in my report, I felt confident in making based off the materials that I reviewed.
So let's go back to State's Exhibit 139. I know you've encircled the aperture, but I want to clear it out. Did you look at this image for deformation?
Not just this image, I would go through all the images.
Okay, let's talk about this specific one. Do you see any plastic deformation in this image?
Any of the deformation that I see to that nasal aperture is related to the antemortem trauma.
And tell the jurors where that is or would be.
So you can't really see the fracture lines in this image here, but there's antemortem trauma to the nasals here, and it comes down to the maxilla here. And so essentially this region is pushed in a little bit from that antemortem trauma. And up here, the nasals, because of those fractures and the way that it healed, some of the bones somewhat overlap one another.
Would you expect to see plastic deformation if bone heals when it's malaligned? What might result?
I probably wouldn't use the term plastic deformation. I would say that it's displacement related to the healing and the fracture.
And where you've just, that area there, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 140. Do you recognize that photo?
Yes.
Is that a better depiction of that area that I just circled?
It is a close-up, yes.
And tell the jurors what you're seeing in that photograph.
If I draw, can you erase mid-talk if I ask you to?
Sure can.
Okay. So what we're seeing is here, this is all left nasals, and this is all right nasal bones, and then you have maxilla on either side. And then what I'm seeing here is from the antemortem trauma, we have some displacement of those nasals that were fractured, and you can see that there's all these rounded edges where the bone has healed on top of itself in that area. And so all these rounded edges here are all evidence of antemortem trauma.
Can I clear?
Yes.
Do you see any perimortem trauma in
No.
this picture? You do not. Specifically, this area right here. Do you see any perimortem trauma there?
No.
And why or why not?
It looks like the nasal aperture. It looks like the rim of the nasal aperture right there. And in fact, I mean, if you're thinking about a fracture occurring, you'd have to have another part of the bone that fractured off of there. And this is already extending well into that nasal aperture.
Was this photo one of the 4 photos, State's Exhibit 140 in Dr. Agnew's report?
I believe so. I'd have to double check.
Showing you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 143. Tell me if you want me to reorient the photo as well.
That's fine.
Do you recognize this picture?
Yes.
And you can't see that. And what is it?
So this edge right here, right, is that nasal aperture on the left side of the maxilla.
So, and with that, I want to show you 140. Is that seen in this picture?
No.
Is it seen in 139?
Yes.
Just to orient ourselves and show the jurors where it is.
So it's this region right here. And so
Nope.
So the line I drew in the last one is consistent with the line I'm drawing right here.
So now I want to go back so that we're oriented to State's Exhibit 143. And this is the line that you just talked about.
Correct.
First, before we get to that line, describe, here's a good fracture.
This destruction in the bone right here is another antemortem fracture. You do have some space and gap that's still here, but it's very clear that you have rounding of the edges up here. And if you were to slide it down a little bit, my arrow's in the way. There you go. You can really see how that's healing up in that place. So that's an antemortem fracture. And it in some of the images too, you can trace that antemortem fracture
There's one in
and
the back.
continuous with the nasal bone fractures.
Is it possible in one fracture to have antemortem and then perimortem?
No, in a single fracture, if there's signs of healing at all on that fracture, it's antemortem. If you had an antemortem fracture that was then refractured, there would be signs of that. You'd have disruption in the healed bone that was there.
I want to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 142. Do you recognize this photo?
Yes.
And generally, what is this depicting?
This is the left side of the face, showing this is the nasal aperture right there.
And with respect to antemortem trauma in this photograph, do you see any?
Yes. So this is the fracture that I'm going to run alongside it. This is the fracture that we just noticed, went over in the slide previously. And you can see that fracture line continues up here. In some of the actual JPEG photographs, you can see it better that this fracture line then continues over on the nasals there. There's also another healed fracture that kind of comes in that way.
I want to go back to the State's Exhibit 143. Is that same line?
Yes.
What about, and so this is antemortem in your opinion?
Yes.
Talk to us about this edge.
That edge is the edge of the nasal aperture. Can you scroll it up a little bit, of course, please? You can see here that this edge is the same as that edge. That's just that edge to the opening there.
And so an opinion with respect to this edge being perimortem, what would your opinion be as to that finding?
No, there's no evidence of perimortem trauma.
That's State's Exhibit 143. In this picture, 142, was there any post-mortem trauma noted in Dr. Agnew's report?
So we wouldn't refer to postmortem as trauma. We would use the word damage. No, there was not.
Let's talk about why do you say post-mortem damage and not trauma?
Trauma infers that it was an injury. Something that happens post-mortem is not going to be an injury.
Did you notice through the course of your review of the photographs in this case that there was post-mortem damage as depicted in State's Exhibit 142?
In this case, the lacrimals are damaged. Usually you're not going to have a big hole there. There's a bone that covers right there.
And where does post-mortem damage, how does it happen?
There's lots of ways. When remains are exposed to the elements, there's animal scavenging, birds, rodents, anything that is like post-depositional. So even transport of remains, processing the remains, that would all be post-mortem damage.
And if you, in your work doing external case reviews, well, I guess case
I'm not
reports,
sure that
would you include
Teen Wolf is a man,
post-mortem
though.
damage if you saw it?
With a post-mortem damage to the lacrimal, we do see that fairly often because it is a fragile area there. If it wasn't in the report, it should be in the bench notes.
And what are bench notes?
Bench notes are the notes you take as you're analyzing the case that then you use to synthesize your report from.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 131. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
And what is it?
This is the photograph after processing of the hyoid bone and its elements that were available.
And
That's
tell
a
us
nice
about,
clean
what's
bone, that
depicted
is.
on what would be my right side of the
Well,
photograph.
that's the other thing. Like,
So the
Blackwood's
hyoid,
gonna
the hyoid
eat
actually
away
starts
some of
off
that-
as 3 separate
that
pieces where
bone.
you have the body of the
Yeah.
I
hyoid,
think.
actually more than 3, but 3 that you can see here.
So it's not
The
gonna
body of
look
the
the
hyoid,
same.
a greater
No.
horn here, and a greater horn here. There are lesser horns that are tiny that would actually fuse on there too. With age, some individuals' hyoids do fuse the greater horns to the body there. Not everyone's, but many do with age. And so that's the hyoid there. This is the fragment of the left greater horn, and we don't have the fragment of the right.
Do you know, based on your review of the materials and the photographs, where this greater horn is?
No.
Anything noteworthy with respect to the fracture that appears here and here?
I mean, the fractures are occurring in the greater horns.
And this is, I'm trying to find a picture pre-processing. It is marked, but I'm not sure the number. But you talked about that peroxide and the effect it can have on bone. Showing you, do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, that's an autopsy photograph of the hyoid, the major component of that hyoid.
And is this photograph, if you know, before or after the processing done at Ohio State University?
Pre-processing.
And this is after processing?
Correct.
Hold on. This was a slide that was shown yesterday, State's Exhibit 138. Tell us what we're seeing here.
These are the 2 stereomicroscopic photographs that I had to review of the superior horns of the thyroid cartilage.
When you said stereoscopic pictures, what does that mean?
So a stereoscopic microscope, we can look through with 2 eyes. It'll be low magnification. We're not looking for cells. We're just trying to get a better look at margins. And when we're using a stereoscopic microscope, most of them or many of them will have a camera built in so that we can take photographs of what we're seeing to document that.
And the greater horns, are they present in this photograph?
The superior horns of the thyroid, yes.
We talked about it earlier, but to come full circle, this photograph is before or after processing?
After processing.
And it is, again, a picture of the thyroid cartilage?
It's a picture of those superior aspects of the thyroid cartilage.
When we talked earlier about not having a photograph of the horns or the thyroid cartilage before being processed, why is that important?
What I teach my students is you want to document. I'll take hundreds of photographs. And what I'll do, especially if a case were to come in that there was any suspicion of hyoid or thyroid fractures, I would look for those. I would document those prior to processing so that I could show that any kind of defects were there before I did anything to the remains.
Makes sense.
And I know you defined peri-mortem
I think that's how you do it.
days, weeks, months earlier, but based on the photographs that you reviewed, and particularly State's Exhibit 138, can you rule out the possibility that either of those fractures occurred during removing of the body from the scene?
Objection, Your Honor. We approach.
Short stack has a problem.
Yeah.
I think this is a lengthy one, so we'll. Oh, maybe it's not. Oh,
Anything that's
Go ahead.
inconsistent.
oops.
There is nothing to
Damn it, I'm terrible at this. Leave it. No, the next one. The
next
one's
one's
where
the-
they take a big break. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna leave it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna fuck it up. Prosecutors are pissed. Look at all 3 of them. They're angry,
Yeah.
especially the leprechaun here, Raggedy Ann, short stack.
Ooh, yeah. She is not happy. Oh, and
Man's
she
laughing.
is though.
Ex parte communications.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the little angry man.
Oh,
He's
goodness.
so upset.
Hobbits. They're all hobbits.
State's Exhibit 138. It's entitled, this was a slide with Dr. Agnew, perimortem trauma. Let me lead with, do you see and did you find perimortem trauma on the thyroid cartilage?
So with the thyroid cartilage, I didn't see anything that was inconsistent with anthropologically perimortem fractures of the thyroid cartilage.
Tell me what you mean by anything that's inconsistent.
Pen mouth.
There is nothing to suggest, based on the photograph that I'm viewing, that these fractures cannot be perimortem. You see on the one side, there is some fraying suggesting that the bone was relatively fresh when that occurred. Also, the ossified thyroid cartilage is not a normal bone. It's not, because it starts off as cartilage. So what's happening is as you get older, that cartilage starts to calcify and turn to bone just as part of the degenerative process. So it's not the same bony thickness or texture. And so you might get fractures that are slightly
You're
different
a degenerate.
in that structure.
I'm not a
Show me
yeah.
what's been marked as State's Exhibit 30.
We all are.
And I put them side by side for a reason. Do you recognize those?
Yes.
And what are those?
Those, again, are the superior horns of the thyroid.
Oh shit! Stop it, Diane. I wanted to make a point. God damn it! Then I did it again. That's where we're at. Yep. Okay. So look at how kind of hollow that is. So the peroxide, if it was left in 2% hydrogen, that concentrated in that much hydrogen peroxide, you would think it would eat away at some of that bone, making it not, especially in places like that where it's almost transparent.
It's so thin.
Like,
yeah.
It would have to have some kind of effect on it. I don't know that scientifically, but it just reasonably it seems like it would.
Yeah. Cartilage and bone peroxide is going to help it to decay, break down.
Right. It's going to eat away at it. So it's caustic. So
Yeah. Thank you. That's the word.
yeah. One would think. And then how do you know that this didn't happen then? You know? I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
So maybe she gets into that.
The fractures that are seen there.
I sure hope so.
The fracture over here on this side, again, you can see the bone has been pulled apart. You have what's delamination or bone tearing occurring, which would indicate some elasticity to that region. Over here, I don't see any signs of healing. It looks different. You don't have that fraying there, but again, because the thyroid cartilage ossifies a little bit differently, I don't have anything to say that that's not perimortem.
From an anthropological perspective, if it's said that these fractures are perimortem, is it possible to say this one happened 4 weeks ago and this one happened 5 weeks ago?
No.
It's not. The perimortem we just know is days, weeks, or months, or and you said even up to a year.
Yes.
I'm
And
pretty
showing
sure
you
Matt
what's been
said
marked
she
as
broke
State's
her
Exhibit
nose too.
41. I know
Yeah.
I asked you about this image and whether you saw perimortem fracture there. I hadn't shown you this image, which is the same, is it not? That's depicting the same area.
Yes, the arrows are depicting the same area.
Do you have the same finding and conclusion with respect to not seeing perimortem trauma in this image when you also compare it to that image?
Yes, I didn't make any of my conclusions off of a single image. I would look through all images available.
She had a broken nose years ago,
So,
but never had a nose
circling
job
back,
that he was aware of.
could-
Yep.
Well, let me go now to the last page of your report so that you can
There's a man for you.
There's
talk
two
through what
men.
we're seeing there.
There's three men.
Page 15 of your report. And let me clear and zoom in. These are 15 of 15 of your report. Does that sound right?
Correct.
And tell the jurors what these images, they seem to be A, B, C, D, E, and F are depicting. And let me try and get to a place where they're clear.
So if you recall, part of my review that I was asked to do included Dr. Smock's report. And so some of my findings are refuting some statements that were made within his report. In his report, I noted that he had a drawing from an anatomical textbook of the hyoid and thyroid process and really emphasized how far apart they were from a drawing. And so I went to the literature to find CT scans, which are actual depictions of actual individuals' hyoid and thyroid cartilages.
Before I ask you about what we're seeing in these pictures, showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 130 by the state, you mentioned that there was a drawing included in Dr. Smock's report. Do you recognize this?
That's the one I'm referring to.
And tell the jurors what you mean by it seemed to show a large space.
Well, not just that it showed a large space, he
Oh,
was
things so
emphasizing
brittle,
in
it
the written
makes
part
me
of his text that
squeamish.
it's a large space.
Yeah.
That space is going to vary individual by individual. A lot of anatomical texts are drawn to emphasize the individual parts for medical students. And even as you're sitting there and swallowing, you'll get movement of that thyroid cartilage and the hyoid bone.
So going back to so it was in response to this drawing that you included these images in your report.
Yes, because I felt it was misleading.
And take us through.
I felt it was misleading.
Yes.
See if that gets clear for the jurors.
I swear to God, some of his exemplars were
Okay,
cat
take us through the
skulls.
A image. This image right here. What is that?
I thought so too. They
So-
weren't human.
All this entire image within the box is the figure and the caption from this article, Becker et al. 2014. And so their caption reads, Figure 1, normal ossification patterns of the laryngeal cartilages and hyoid bone in a 65-year-old male with complete ossification of thyroid and cricoid cartilages A through C, and then a 41-year-old male with incomplete ossification D through F. So one individual is the top, one individual is the bottom. A and D are axial images, so say CT scans. They're difficult to interpret, but the reason I included them
true.
was for the actual
Comically
3D
large
renderings
example.
of those cartilages that you can see in B, C, E, and F.
Tell us where in B, C, E, and F you're seeing the hyoid bone.
So this is the hyoid bone here, 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 and here. So these are two different individuals.
Yes. Now, what about the question? Well, but Dr. Garvin, those images don't belong to a 100-pound woman.
That's true. We will never know exactly how a decedent's hyoid bone and thyroid bone sat in themselves when we don't have the soft tissue connecting them anymore.
Tell us where the thyroid cartilage is in each of those two individuals.
So the laminae of the thyroid cartilage are here, and then the horns go up here.
Now, the horns that you just talked about, could you? It almost appears as if they are.
They're filled with
Are
cats.
the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage connected by the horns?
There is no joint there. There's no connection right there. Other than through, there's a thyroid-hyoid ligament, which is connective tissue that attaches the hyoid bone to that thyroid cartilage.
Tigger always
Is
sits
there
on the
anything
floor.
in between the
Chairs
hyoid
are
and
just
the
for
thyroid
looking.
cartilage?
Yes, that's that thyroid-hyoid ligament I just mentioned.
I want to talk more about your findings with respect to Dr. Smock's report. And I know we went through it in the beginning, but tell the jurors with respect to the findings that he made regarding the 4 fractures could never be from a hanging. What is your opinion with respect to that conclusion?
There are no thyroid-hyoid fracture patterns that are specific to manual strangulation versus hanging. It is possible to get them. They're very similar mechanisms in creating that compression there. So you cannot say that it cannot happen with hanging.
And tell the jurors what you base that opinion on.
Well, I had my individual knowledge. I have my knowledge of my peers as well. But I don't like to just rely on what I know or what I think I know. So I go to the literature and I research and I see what the literature says and whether it supports that conclusion or not.
Showing you what's been marked. In
Sounds
your
like a lot of
report
work.
with respect to your,
It
I can
does.
see why the other ones didn't do it.
Did you cite literature?
Especially
Yes.
since they're paid by the government.
Well, yeah.
And can I be clear? I'm not saying it was a hanging. All I'm saying is that fracture pattern, you cannot say it's inconsistent. You cannot say you get that fracture. You cannot say you can't get that fracture pattern from a hanging.
And I was going to ask you that question, right? You're just saying it can't be ruled out. Is that a better way to say it?
Correct.
marking this as defendant's QQ. This has been provided in materials. Dr. Garvin, do you recognize this publication?
Yes.
And what is it?
So Zadapkova et al. Is a 2018 article in the Forensic Science International. They did a very thorough review of a lot of the literature out there on laryngomyxoid fractures in hanging. I think they have 204 citations in there, so it's very thorough, as well as their own study looking at fractures in that situation.
And tell the jurors why you include this as publication that supports your findings with respect to Dr. Smock's opinions.
So while a lot of the literature out there refers to combined hyoid and thyroid fractures, it doesn't actually specify whether they're unilateral or bilateral, but this article did. This article specifically referenced bilateral hyoid and bilateral thyroid cartilages.
And what is the ultimate conclusion within the article?
While it was a small percentage, 3.4%, it did occur.
And when you say it did occur, what do you mean by that?
In 3.4% of their study sample, they found bilateral hyoid combined with bilateral thyroid fractures in hanging.
And what, if anything, would you say in response to, well, tell the jurors, does that article specifically study women that are 100 pounds in weight?
No.
And is there a study that you found with the same or similar findings that only studies women that are 100 pounds in weight?
No.
I'll ask you the other question. And if you search for one, is there any literature, publication, anything to support that a 100-pound woman with those 4 fractures, so the 2 bilateral flat fractures on the hyoid and then on the thyroid cartilage, was manually strangled?
The literature, this is actually a hot topic in the literature as far as number of fractures with hanging. There are dozens of articles that do contradict one another. I did go through a lot of the literature. I looked for manual strangulation articles as well. I did not find any that specified a 4 fracture pattern. The only unique signature that is suggested in the literature for manual strangulation is fracture of the cricoid cartilage.
Could you explain that last part?
For something.
The chair does belong to the cat.
Yeah. Occasionally they swap, but
Yeah, there are 2 cats, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Skip both.
it's 2.
Oh, pen's back in the mouth.
Yeah, she is not impressed.
Oh, this is fantastic. Like you can just see the frustration on his face.
Yeah. And she knows their case is going down.
Yeah.
I want to see her talk, but forget the pens in her mouth.
Spit it at the court reporter.
Yeah.
No, little man, sit down, son.
Oh, good Lord, Jenny. No, I will not get a 3rd cat. 2 is too many for this house, this apartment. But I probably would leave it for them anyways. Make me the crazy chair lady. Yeah. I'll be found dead one day, just sitting on the corner in the floor surrounded by chairs.
No,
You know what,
they're still
Linder?
fighting.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, she's very impressed with just how badly her case has gone and just how good the other lawyer is doing, the defense is doing. This one witness here or expert has put all the rest of them under. Like, they weren't very trustworthy or believable on stage as was, or on the stand as was, but now with this lady, you can tell that the others didn't take the time.
Right. All right. I'm going, well, because I think we're Yeah, they're gonna fight for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you a good option to not fuck it up. It's
Well,
not
no.
entirely my fault. There, that was perfect.
Oh, that worked really well. Yeah.
After discussion, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to strike the answer to the last question. We're going to start with another question.
Thank you. Dr. Gardner, as part of the court order, you were allowed to listen to the testimony of other experts. Were you able to listen to the testimony of either Dr. Agnew in full or and in part? The same question about Dr. Smock.
In part for both, most of Agnew's and a part of Smock's.
And during the time of their testimony, what if anything, were you doing that might have prevented you from listening to the full thing?
Traveling out here.
With respect to a statement that Dr. Smock made under oath when he testified that there is absolutely no literature supporting that a 100-pound woman could have the 4 fractures and from a hanging. What, if any, opinion do you have with respect to that statement?
Well, it's obvious that there is at least one article, if not more, indicating that this fracture pattern can occur with hanging. While it may not specifically have a 100-pound, 52-year-old woman, there's lots of things regarding the scenario. And I mean, there's ligatures, there's health, there's bone density, there's a lot of different factors that go in. I would not be comfortable saying that this could not happen, given that it does.
Showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit II. You just mentioned that there's literature. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
Oh no,
And
it's great
if you
to hear
could,
what they're saying.
what is this?
So this is an article by Betts and Eisenmenger. I'm probably butchering that. Apologies to the author. In the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology that was published in 1996.
And are you familiar generally or specifically with this article's, the study that was done and the conclusions that were reached?
Yes.
And what was the data set, if you will, that was looked at in this study?
As the abstract mentions right here, it's a total of 109 cases of suicidal or accidental hanging evaluated looking at the hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage for fractures.
And what, if any, conclusions are in that publication with respect to individuals that had those 4 fractures or the bilateral fractures?
So of the individuals that displayed fractures, 7 individuals or 10% of those individuals had bilateral hyoid and bilateral thyroid fractures.
Going to page 3 of that article, are you familiar with page 3 of that publication and the chart that is on top of page 3?
Yes.
And how within all of that
But
chart?
no carbs
relates to
or starch.
finding that 10% of the 109 people had the bilateral fractures and also died of hanging.
If you
so
boo me,
the
I'm
only
gonna
sample
be
in
really
this study
upset,
is hanging,
Bobby.
suicidal and accidental. But what they're doing in this
Said you
table is
know
they're
what
breaking it
you've
down
done-
by
what
age
you've done.
cohort,
Apparently.
because age has been shown to be a significant factor when it comes to these fractures occurring. So they're showing the age number is the number of individuals they had in their sample at those age ranges, presented positive results, and then the actual number of individuals that had 1, 2, 3, or 4 fractures per those age groups.
You mentioned that age can be an important factor. Why is that?
So the numerous articles have showed a correlation between age and fracturing of the laryngohyoid elements. Part of that is probably due to fusion of the hyoid bone, those greater horns to the body. Part of that's probably also the ossification of that thyroid cartilage.
After hearing the portions of Dr. Smock's testimony that you did, and also hearing the portions of Dr. Agnew's testimony that you did, I want to go back to Defendant's Exhibit TT with respect to the findings that you made in this case that are summarized here in the first paragraph. The first finding, again, with respect to perimortem fractures, is that still your finding a conclusion based on a reasonable degree of medical certainty in this case?
Yes.
Second one, with respect to no evidence of perimortem trauma to the craniofacial region. Does that remain based on not just your review of the materials and the photographs, but also listening to the testimony of both of those individuals?
Correct.
Have you also done additional research into these areas while this case has been pending?
Yes.
Just describe generally, how much time would you say that you've been looking to find any literature? And I joke because I've come to know you and how much you work.
I like to be extremely thorough in my work. I want to make sure that any conclusions that I'm drawing are correct, just not only based on my knowledge, but the knowledge that is out there in the fields and in science. If I had to put in a number, I'm embarrassed to put a number into. Oh,
geez.
I'd have to say at least 50 hours.
Have you discussed your findings and conclusions in this case, just generally with your peers?
I have asked my peers.
I didn't ask what your peers said.
Wow.
Mm.
You're just
Yes.
being
You have.
idiot now.
And why, without saying what those conversations were, why would you do that?
Because some of those individuals work in medical examiners' offices, and I want to confirm that everything that I know and everything that I'm seeing, that there's not evidence against that.
So I'll go now to the third finding with respect to the antemortem trauma to the nasal bone and the left maxilla. Does that remain your finding in this case to a reasonable degree of medical and scientific certainty?
Yes.
And then lastly, with respect to the fourth finding, the potential area of slight postmortem damage to the left lateral nasal aperture. Does that remain your finding in this case to a reasonable degree of medical and scientific certainty?
Yes, we did not show that or discuss that, but yes.
Yeah, we talked about the aperture though.
But we did not talk about the potential postmortem damage.
Oh, the postmortem. I'm sorry. You know what? Let's do that now.
Exactly,
Let
Aaron.
me get out the picture of the nasal aperture. Showing you what's been marked as States Exhibit 41.
Pretty
Tell
much.
me if this picture can be used to illustrate your fourth finding.
It's
gonna grab
not
some
the
coffee.
best one.
Can we get to the other one? 1 second.
Is it possible to use a figure from my report?
It is, yes.
That might be
Which
easier.
page?
Judge also gives them a ton of leeway to do stuff like go through reports and stuff. I think this is a
Page
good
14
judge.
to 15.
Showing you page 14 of 15 of your report. Tell us what we're seeing there.
So in this figure, I'm documenting what I stated as potential postmortem damage. And so again, I had 432 photographs. Some of them were from the scene. And so from the scene photographs, I zoomed in really close to look at that nasal aperture to see what was there prior to anything happening. And you notice on the left side of the maxilla is the area in question here. Oh, can you delete that arrow? I'm sorry.
Don't be.
The nasal aperture, that rim around that hole, looks fairly continuous right there. That green arrow is pointing to where that antemortem fracture is on the left maxilla. This was another view over here from the scene. And again, you can see it's fairly continuous right here. We don't have a large gap there. And then this was a photograph from autopsy, at which point I noticed where that
Some
green arrow
plutonium
is
would
down
be
here
nice.
at the bottom, that there's a small area of white on that fracture
Send it to me.
margin, on that nasal margin there. Color differentiation is one of the things we would use to look for postmortem damage, because if something happened more recently, it's not going to be stained from the decompositional processes and the environment. So that seemed questionable, which is why I went back to the original scene photos. You can also see that it's not as continuous. There's an angle there. Again, based on the photos, I didn't feel 100% saying that this is postmortem damage, which is why I put it as potential.
Could you circle the discoloration that you just talked about?
Aaron
So
will take some
there's-
Mike and Ike's.
It's
Reasonable
It's a
people
little
here.
washed out.
nothing further.
I'm gonna make my own. Damn it.
Ladies and gentlemen, our afternoon break. Remember the course admonition?
Yes,
See you back at
please.
the usual time.
All right, I'm gonna try not to screw this one up. Skipping ahead. Oh shit. Oh shit.
See, you jinxed yourself. You should have just done it.
I know. I did want to make mention. I believe it was on the Corner show on Saturday, but Matt was talking about how this is not the original Delaware County, Ohio judge. The other one kind of skated because he didn't want to deal with the political ramifications of it. Was
Oh.
his opinion. So this is a retired judge that came back in just to preside over this case.
That's kind of
So- Shitty?
iffy. Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't want to get affected by the politics. So let's pull dude out of retirement.
Yeah,
Just force him to
exactly.
come back for this.
Right. And I think he was a damn good judge, but just
I liked him. Yeah.
a footnote from what Matt was saying. So
Hmm.
I know I tried so hard. Yeah, this one was pulled out of retirement. Yes, that was also stated this weekend. Yeah, okay. when you're on two shows doing the same thing,
Yeah.
you forget which one comes from which one.
Thank you. Have a seat. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. If I ask you a question, you're not sure what I mean, please stop me. I want to make sure that we're asking clear questions.
Shut up, Wish.com Wolverine.
All right.
Just sit down.
So I want to start with you termed it when defense counsel asked you if you did an analysis in this case, you sort of stopped. Is that fair?
Well, I analyzed the reports.
When the word analysis was used, you said, well, hold on, it was really a case review.
Correct, because I wanted to specify.
And so you, in
I
this
know.
case, did not do when you had listed on your resume as full forensic analyses, forensic anthropological analyses. This is not one of those.
Correct.
This will go under the case review
It's a friggin' Ewok.
part of your resume.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so as a result, you never looked at the bones yourself in this
He's
case.
the president of
Correct.
the Lollipop
And so
Guild.
what you did is reviewed the other reports that you talked about, correct?
Correct.
And you reviewed the photographs that were provided, correct?
Correct.
But you yourself did not do an analysis of the bones.
Correct.
And so your report then, in part, is a criticism of some of the ways that Dr. Agnew wrote her report, right?
Not just the ways, but the conclusions based on the photographs.
So we'll get to the conclusions. I want to talk first. You talked about criticizing the way.
No.
Oh, I didn't just
whole
criticize the
damn
way
thing.
she did it.
Right.
Now, we're here talking about injuries to the neck and injuries to the face. We're going to talk about those two topics. But would you agree with me that an age range of this skeleton has nothing to do with those two things? Right?
Aaron, if it's female, I
Does not
wouldn't
have
be
to do with the trauma.
surprised.
Correct.
And so whether or not she used one standard deviation or two standard deviations, that doesn't affect in any way your conclusions about the types of trauma that we're seeing in the skeleton, correct?
Correct.
Same thing with regard to toes being missing. Whether or not they documented what toes were where, that has nothing to do with your conclusions about the trauma with regard to the neck and face, correct? Same thing with regard to the discrepancy in what teeth were present. Whether or not one molar went here, one molar was in the dirt, one molar went for DNA, that again has no impact whatsoever on your opinions on the trauma to the neck and face, correct?
Correct.
Same thing with regard to the lack of a pre-processing photo of the thyroid. Because even without that, you concluded that there was perimortem trauma to the greater horns of the thyroid, correct?
Correct. There's anthropologically perimortem trauma.
Same with regard to the potential area of postmortem. I'm going to call it eye socket because I don't have a clue what the word was you used. The postmortem.
What do you think, guys?
I was just
Look
looking
at the
it up.
prosecutor.
I thought it sounded familiar. I knew it sounded familiar. Oh my gosh.
No, stop.
Oh, no.
Eye socket damage.
The lacrimal. Correct.
Whack-a-mole. Whack-a-mole. Put it down as that. The eye socket damage. That again has nothing to do with your ability to conclude about the damage.
If
to the
somebody
neck.
says something, I will look it
So
up
fair to say that a large
every
portion
single
of
time.
your
You were
report,
just quicker than me.
the ways that Ohio State documented things really has nothing to do with the reasons why we're here today, right?
Well, the reason why I'm here is because I was asked to review these reports and I was asked to review them in whole. So that's what I did.
That's fair. Let me ask it a different way. What's important for the jury to determine is what injuries are present in the neck and face. Would you agree with that?
I don't know that I can say.
You can go ahead and answer your question.
I mean, you go ask the question.
I'm sorry. She'll answer the question.
The most important detail out of the anthropological analysis is the damage or lack of damage to the neck and face. Would you agree with that?
I hesitate because I'm not familiar with the entire case. And so I don't know what other aspects of the case there are and whether some of the things would be relevant in my report.
You would agree with me that you wrote a 4 bullet point summary of your important findings, right?
Correct.
You would agree with me, number of teeth not matching up isn't in the 4 bullet points of the summary that's important.
Correct.
Same question with regard to where the toes are, right? Not in the summary.
Correct.
So when you wrote your report, you knew that the important parts that we're talking about are injury or lack of injury to the neck and face, correct?
Correct. Those had the highest implications or impacts.
All right. And those other things that you talked about, your criticisms of Ohio State's report or potentially their processes, don't impact your opinion with regard to the trauma to the neck and face, correct?
Correct.
All right. So let's focus on the things that are important. You would agree with me that accuracy is important, right?
Correct.
That words matter, correct?
I'm doing it all
Let's talk
wrong.
first in
Shit.
bullet point number 2.
I keep putting them in toasters.
I know.
You wrote in your summary, bullet point number 2, that there is no evidence of perimortem fractures to the craniofacial region. Is that what you wrote?
Correct.
No evidence is the phrase.
Correct.
I'll show you the bottom.
Is she gonna try and refute that?
Yeah, he sounds like he's going for a gotcha, but I don't see what.
This could be fun.
Yeah.
You could have fucked up real bad.
I'm going to start with the materials and through maxilla. Can you read that sentence for us?
The materials I reviewed support the perimortem fractures to the laryngeal structures, hyoid and thyroid, but I did not observe evidence of definitive perimortem trauma to the nasals or left maxilla.
Evidence of definitive perimortem trauma, right?
Correct.
Top of page 4 of your report.
I think he's not understanding what he's saying right now.
Yeah.
Second sentence there, starting with reviewing. What's that say?
Reviewing the case photographs, I do not observe any definitive perimortem trauma to either nasals or maxillae, discussed further below.
Again, no evidence of definitive perimortem trauma, right?
Correct.
No, I think he's just scrambling for anything.
No, I think
Down at
he
the bottom of
thinks
page 6.
there's a gotcha. He just
You are
is
summarizing
realizing
your
that it's not the case.
You'd agree with me again. You find no definitive evidence of perimortem trauma, right?
Correct.
Definitive.
So
Definitive.
your opinion, the text of your opinion talks about whether or not there's definitive evidence of it, right?
Correct.
Not that there is a possibility of that evidence, right?
I didn't state anywhere that there is questionable fractures.
You would agree with me that the only place in your report in which you put no evidence, as in no evidence whatsoever, is in the summary on the first page, right?
Sure.
Everywhere else, there's that modifier. It hedges a little bit to say no definitive evidence, right?
Sure.
Now, you would agree with
That's-
me
You don't
that
put
a
the whole paper
two-dimensional
in the
picture
summary.
does not capture all of the features that you can see on an actual bone, right?
I hesitate because I'm not sure what's meant by all the features.
Looking at a picture the same thing as looking at a bone?
A picture is 2-dimensional, a bone is 3-dimensional.
Can you take a picture, digital or otherwise, turn it, look at it at a different angle, look at it under different lights?
I mean, you could look at it at different angles and lights,
But that doesn't change what's on the picture, right?
unless you have bad lighting. Yeah.
That doesn't change what you can see on the bone in that picture, right?
Correct.
If you had an actual bone and you couldn't see something as well, you could turn it, put a different light source
I
on
don't
it.
know
look
who
at it a
Penn
different way,
Gillette
maybe
is,
you
so
would
I
see
don't know if
something
that's a
Penn and
good
Tenor.
picture or bad
Penn and Teller.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
So you would agree
Yeah.
with me that a person who looks at the actual bone, who has the opportunity to do that,
Yeah, a little. I can see
is
that.
in a better position to make a judgment about what's on that bone than someone who just looks at pictures, right?
It is ideal to be able to look at the remains.
So that person is in a better position than someone who's just looking at a picture, right?
It depends on that person.
I understand. I'm not talking about the quality of the person, the quality of review. I'm saying two situations. Either you are looking at pictures or you are looking at the actual bones. Which is better?
I would prefer the actual bones.
Because that's the best practice in your profession, correct?
Correct. When possible.
And so in this case, you did a case review looking at the photographs that were taken of the bones, correct?
Correct.
He's so damn
And in looking
unlikable.
at those
He really is.
photographs, you believe
Yeah.
that the photographs did not definitively support the conclusions of the person who looked at the bones, right?
Correct.
And yet, despite that, you did not ask if you could see the bones, correct?
Correct.
You never made any effort to attempt to examine the actual source material that you're talking about today,
Wait, what?
the bones themselves.
Not, I would disagree with that statement.
Yeah, I thought you saw them after
Source
they'd been
material is part of
bleached.
your objection.
Right.
You looked at photographs.
No, that's
of
not
the
part of
source
my
material.
objection.
All right.
I did at some point agree to go look at the remains about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay, that's perfect. That's good. So you authored your report.
Pictures memorialize the
September
event
21st of
because
2021.
not everybody
Correct.
can get to the
So
bones.
you got
Yeah.
engaged
For
to participate in this
eternity.
case on behalf, to write a report on behalf of the defense on September 3rd, right?
Correct.
And between September 3rd and September 21st, you reviewed photographs, correct?
Correct.
You determined that you believe, based on what you saw in the photographs, didn't match the conclusions with regard to the nose of Dr. Agnew, right?
Correct.
And yet you made no effort before authoring your report to see if you could look at the bones themselves, right?
Correct.
And so you also
Mhm.
testified on direct that there were things in the report about the process. I think rehydration was the word that you'd never heard of before, right?
Correct. I had not heard of it as a process, as a term.
So surely then you picked up the phone and called and said, "What is this?"
To who?
The person who wrote the report?
I don't believe that would be appropriate.
Send an email to say, "What is the process that was going on here?"
When defense has asked me to review reports of an individual, no.
So if there's a report that's unclear to you, you just write a report that says this is unclear. You don't make any effort to try to clear it up.
Whoever requested the report would have the report that says, I cannot make this determination from there. And it is their decision then to decide whether to send me the bones so that I can make that decision if they're available.
You said you were able to listen to a portion of Dr. Agnew's testimony, correct?
Correct.
Did you hear Dr. Agnew testify about the procedures and processes they used to deflesh the bones?
I honestly can't recall.
Okay, so you have no idea if what she testified to fixes some of the concerns
Oh,
that you
really?
raised in your report.
Shit.
I base my concerns
That's what I
off
was
of the
thinking.
report.
I understand. So what your conclusion was that the written report wasn't clear.
No,
It didn't have a time frame on it. So it wasn't clear how long the time frame was, right?
correct.
So that part wasn't clear. You didn't hear the testimony. I don't know, maybe it was only yesterday. You didn't hear the testimony yesterday or the day before about how long any of those processes actually took place.
I don't recall.
Now,
She wasn't asked to review the testimony, just a fucking report. If your
Mhm.
guy was an idiot and didn't do it,
even
then
after
that's
you
his
authored
fault.
your report in September of 2021, you still never asked anything about seeing the bones until you said 2 weeks ago.
Correct. And I still didn't ask.
I want to talk about trauma
Exactly.
mechanisms.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, in forensic anthropology, you're able to classify trauma mechanisms into a couple different categories. Is that right?
Correct. We will talk about the type of trauma.
And so you'll talk about a high velocity projectile type of trauma, right?
Correct.
Gunshot.
Correct.
You'll talk about sharp force trauma, correct?
Correct.
Knife, something with a sharp edge, that type of thing, right?
Correct.
You talk about thermal trauma, right?
Yes, or thermal modification. Yes.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Thermal modification, and that's burning, right?
Correct.
And then you have the category of blunt force trauma. Is that right?
Correct.
And so, generally speaking, when you are looking at a trauma mechanism, what you can do is classify that trauma into one of those four things, right?
As far as the trauma type, yes.
And so, you would agree with me that the only thing that's at issue in this case is blunt force trauma.
Correct.
And so, there wasn't any signs of gunshots or stab wounds or anything else. We're talking about blunt force trauma.
Correct.
But you don't stop at classifying this as blunt force trauma. You go on to opine about a certain type of blunt force trauma, correct?
I interpreted the trauma.
And so that being hanging, correct?
No.
You said that you can't rule out hanging as the trauma mechanism in this case, correct?
That you cannot rule it out. Correct.
So I want to make sure that we understand each other. This is blunt force trauma to the neck.
Correct.
This is perimortem trauma to the highway bone, correct?
I didn't, but I do now.
By both sides.
Correct.
This is perimortem trauma to the thyroid cartilage, correct?
Anthropologically correct.
Now, you testified on direct examination that you were didn't see anything to rule out perimortem trauma to the thyroid cartilage, right?
Correct.
But that's not actually what your report says, is it?
The fact that I did not see anything to rule out, I didn't see any evidence that it was post-mortem or ante-mortem, went into my conclusion that it is anthropologically perimortem.
Okay, that's why I'm making sure we understand each other. So with regard to the hanging, your testimony is simply you can't rule out.
Weed isn't a
Hanging is a
drug, it's a
mechanism.
plant.
Correct, as a direct refute in the reports.
With
It's a
regard to
medicine,
the perimortem
man.
trauma to the thyroid cartilage, your testimony, your opinion is not just that you can't rule it out, but that it is in fact perimortem trauma, correct?
Correct, I would classify it as anthropologically perimortem.
Okay. So despite any of your other criticisms of the manner in which Ohio State did or did not do certain things, you reached the exact same conclusion with regard to the trauma in the neck.
Yes,
Now, those neck structures, I'm going to talk about them. First, the hyoid. That is I think it's been described as a free floating bone. Is that a fair characterization?
correct,
The only bone in the human body that's not attached to another bone?
correct.
It's just kind of sitting in there underneath your jaw.
Yep,
It
It's been that
is
way.
not connected to the greater horns of the thyroid cartilage, correct?
it depends on what you mean by connected.
Well, thank you. The bone itself on the hyoid is not connected to the bone of the thyroid cartilage.
There is no joint articulation there, correct,
And so I think he testified on direct that there's a ligament in between those two structures in the neck.
correct.
So there is a distance between those two structures.
Typically, yes, correct.
Not typically always. They are not combined. The bones are not resting on each other, correct?
There is not an articulation there, but I would never use the term always because there's human variation and someone's might.
And so you picked out a couple of CT scan photos, right?
Correct.
Those CT scan photos, do you have any idea of the positioning of those individuals at the time that those CT scans were taken?
No,
So whether somebody was laying with their head back or whether they were leaning forward, you have no idea what the position of the neck was at the time those CT scans were taken?
No.
You included them in your report because you believed that the anatomical drawing might be misleading, right?
correct.
Fair to say that those CT scans might be misleading in the other direction, showing them closer together than they would be if I was standing here with my neck just like this.
I guess by misleading, I meant that it's a drawing. It's not actual people.
Right. Just like the anatomical drawing.
Well, it might show the neck that we
you
can't see
used as
here.
part of your slide.
Just saying.
Correct. And the one picture, yes.
One of those was an anatomical drawing.
Yes.
So sometimes anatomical drawings are okay, sometimes they're misleading.
I don't understand. I would like that question clarified.
Me
You
too.
believe that Dr. Spock's use of an anatomical drawing was misleading, but your use of an anatomical drawing was not misleading.
I
That's
put it
that's what your
alongside
opinion is.
4 photographs.
That was your opinion. Is that what you're saying? Is that those two situations are not the same?
Correct.
Now, you would agree with me that the fracture that occurred to the thyroid cartilage is not at the tip, correct?
It's at the base of the greater horn.
The base of the greater
Sorry, the superior horn.
superior meaning top.
Correct. Of the thyroid cartilage, correct.
Okay. So not only is there a distance between the hyoid and the top of the thyroid cartilage, right?
Correct.
We also have to account for the distance between the hyoid and the distance down that thyroid cartilage to the place where the break is, right?
I don't know what you mean by have to account for, but if you're saying, is there a space? Yes.
And so anything that would have caused injury to both of those two structures at the same time would have to account for the distance between those two structures, right?
What do you mean by account for?
As in, if I have a thin cord that isn't even as wide as the distance down the superior horn of the thyroid cartilage, that thin cord couldn't have fractured the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage at the same time. Does that make sense? Accounting for that distance.
Okay, so can you ask the question again then? Sorry.
So there is a distance between the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage itself.
Yes.
There is a further distance from the tip of the thyroid cartilage until the place in which it is fractured.
Correct.
And so if you are looking at something to suggest that it would have fractured both the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage at the same time, that object or item or whatever must account for the distance between those two fractures.
No, it doesn't have to be the distance of those fractures.
If the ligature is too small to be touching both of those structures at the same time, then it cannot be the cause of both injuries simultaneously.
I disagree.
I want to talk
Come on,
about
boy. You can get there.
hanging. You have indicated that hanging cannot be ruled out as a possible mechanism to these fractures, right?
Correct.
You are indicating that, let me just ask it this way. Is that because a hanging somewhere in the universe of hangings has caused the 4 fractures?
Partly, yes.
It is not that the factors present in this hanging, alleged hanging,
Asshole.
show that it
Sorry.
can't be ruled out.
Every case is unique.
Let's talk about that. You, in your study, in your report, excuse me, case review report, talk about hanging on the bottom of page 5, top of page 6. Is that right?
I talk about the review of the literature regarding hanging. Correct.
And in your review of the literature, defense exhibit QQ.
I agree, Ozzy.
I hand you exhibit Q. I'm going to show you another copy of Defense Exhibit QQ. This is the study that you cited, correct?
Correct.
And this is, if we just refer to this as the Zadkova study, is that a good way to refer to it?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the Zadkova study was a study of 178 autopsies of suicidal hangings over a 3-year period, correct?
Correct.
And so they were doing their own autopsies and looking themselves at what injuries they were able to observe, correct?
Correct.
They also conducted a review of other literature regarding hangings and fractures, correct?
Correct.
And there's a large portion of this article that discusses what that other literature says.
Correct.
And in this study, the authors noted certain things that were statistically significant in determining whether or not there would be fractures, correct?
Correct.
And one of those things that they talked about being statistically significant is weight, correct?
I believe in the study, weight was not, but weight when corrected for age was.
After age correction, the chi-square test for 4-pole pivot tables confirmed a significant association between the weights of the victims and the incidence of laryngohyoid fractures, correct?
Correct.
So weight was one of the factors that is statistically significant on whether or not you're going to see fractures.
Corrected for age of their study.
Corrected
Yes.
for age. Additionally, the location of the knot is statistically significant for whether or not you're going to see fractures,
In
correct?
their study, correct.
And where was the knot in this case?
I don't know.
So you don't know whether there was a knot or if there was one, where it was.
I could not see the knot clearly or I could not
Because
see
your
a knot
guys
clearly
cut the
in the
knots.
photos.
Pete's sakes.
You would agree with me, though, that's statistically significant in determining whether or not there's going to be fractures.
Yes, it is one of the
Not
contributing factors.
We'll show that again here on 3.6. The chi-square test identified a significant relationship between the location of the knot on the neck and the occurrence of laryngohyoid fractures, right?
Correct.
So weight adjusted by age, location of the knot, two things that are statistically significant in figuring out whether there's going to be fractures.
In the study, correct.
The authors also discussed that hanging is not the only cause
Flailing like a
of
fish.
laryngohyoid fractures, right?
Yes.
In fact, in their study, they noted strangulations,
Yay.
particularly throttling and homicidal ligature strangulation, are the most common cause of laryngohyoid fractures, correct?
Can you point on there exactly where?
Oh, sure, I'm sorry. Right there.
Correct.
God, this guy's an asshole.
So
Yeah.
the throttling is a physical, an assaultive strangulation, not a suicidal strangulation, right?
Correct.
And so that act is the most common cause of laryngohyoid fractures, correct?
Correct.
Now,
Oh,
Good
fuck
review.
me.
of the other
Did
literature,
they just?
Oh, you bastard. All right, they fucking scrubbed it. I had a feeling they might because they would have to overfly the other one.
Mhm.
God, that sucks. I guess I didn't need to pause for that, but I'm trying to see. We might as well get to the end of this guy if you, well, let's see. I don't know when you are,
I'm here till whenever you want to shut her down.
so about another 45 minutes. Yeah, we'll see where we get.
Okay.
is presented in tables like this, right?
Correct.
And these tables indicate the number of people involved or cases involved in a study, right?
This table
Oh, they
indicates
scrubbed the
all the other
launch for
studies that they
tonight.
reviewed as part of that
The
paper.
second,
And so in
Starlink
this column
one.
here, that was not a very good circle. There's an N. That's the number of cases that we're looking at in those studies, correct?
Correct.
Sticker's
We
fault.
then
She
go
just
over, we
asked
have
me
an
about it.
IH. That means
I jinxed it.
isolated hyoid fracture.
Correct.
We then go over the next one, and there's IT, and that's an isolated thyroid fracture, correct?
Correct.
Then we have a column for H and T. That means they had hyoid and thyroid fractures, correct?
Correct.
And then we have a column for H and
It was
or
very
T, so
likely
assuming
that,
there's at least one.
NASA didn't want them overflying their
Correct.
Nowhere in this
spy plane. I mean,
table
space plane.
Do they talk about the quadruple fracture pattern, correct?
Correct.
And so all this H and T
That's okay.
column
I'm
says
cute,
is
Bobby.
that
I get
there
away with
were
it. That's why
fractures
it's
to
always
each
my fault.
structure, But it
Also
does
true.
not indicate if those fractures were bilateral, as in on both sides.
Correct. It doesn't
Also
specify.
true.
So none of these
In
studies
chat
in
tonight.
this table specifically talk about quadruple fracture patterns. You have no way to tell what's in it.
Correct.
Table 6. And this goes on again for both. It goes in the top of the next page too. This
Cute.
table suffers from the
And
exact
cute,
same
not
problem
cheap.
as table 5 that we just talked about, right?
Correct. The difference is this one is retrospective studies.
Right. So this is looking back at past cases rather than doing autopsies and looking at what's there.
Correct.
And so once again, though, in this set of literature, it does not specify in any place if we're dealing with a quadruple fracture pattern.
It doesn't specify that they're bilateral hyoid and thyroid fractures.
And so just to understand, if I say a quadruple pattern, that's what I mean. 2 fractures of the hyoid, 2 fractures of the thyroid.
Understood.
So it doesn't specify if any of those cases
Correct.
are in there. Okay. So in the Zadapova study,
100%. Yeah, the prosecutors are
did
complete
actually break
assholes
out
for this entire.
when there was this
Sham.
quadruple fracture pattern. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And I'll show you that. So you're on table 2. Yep, still the same as it is. So here, the authors of this study have broken down isolated fractures, right greater horn, left greater horn, superior horns, all the way down until you get to the bottom here, correct?
Correct.
And that's bilateral greater horn. So BSH, both superior horns of the thyroid cartilage, and BGH, both greater horns of the hyoid bone.
Correct.
And so what they found in this study is 6 instances out of 129 hangings that they studied?
It was out of 178, actually.
I'm sorry, 178 total, thank you. Out of 129 that had
Damn,
fractures
son.
of any kind.
Correct.
So 178 cases, 6 instances of that quadruple fracture pattern, right?
Correct.
And that was 3.4% of the cases in their study.
Correct.
And it's upon this piece of literature that you cited in your report to say that this same fracture pattern observed in Ms. Noble's case can occur in a suicidal hanging, right?
Correct.
But you didn't just rely on what was written in the study, did you? In order to reach that conclusion?
No,
You actually emailed the author of the study, correct?
I did.
And you asked the author of the
Yeah.
study
Still put
to
337%
tell you
of the time.
how many of
3.37.
those were incomplete hangings.
That is correct.
And that's because you thought it would be important to know
It's
the
also
difference
an
between
X-Comer
whether
picture that is
the
absolutely
quadruple
perfect.
fracture pattern was in a complete hanging or an incomplete hanging, right?
That was because of Dr. Smock's reliance on the partial hanging. So I wanted supporting evidence to refute that.
And so you thought that you wanted to know how many of those were incomplete hangings, right?
Correct.
So she did more work and tried to gather more information, and you're chastising
How
her
dare
for it?
she?
The fucking nerve on this one.
Yeah.
Jenny Sheenus is aware of Pokemon. It is now.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes,
Generally speaking, can you tell the jury what it is?
it is my email correspondence to the author and their reply.
And is that a true and accurate copy of the entire correspondence that you had with the author of the study?
Yes,
You guys time as to publish these at 166. Your email to one of the authors appears at the bottom of the first page, is that right?
correct.
With the signature line continuing on to the second page?
Correct.
And you asked how many of the cases in that study that had the bilateral fracture of the hyoid and bilateral fracture of the thyroid cartilage, asked if they were incomplete hangings, correct?
Correct.
And you received a response, correct?
Correct.
And due to that response, you wrote in your report, although it is not stated in the article, email correspondence with the authors revealed that 50% of those quadruple fractures were in cases of incomplete hanging, right?
Correct.
But that wasn't all.
Jenny, are you in chat?
that
will you
one of the
send me
authors
that
told you about those cases, was it?
Picture from Comer.
In fact,
I'm working on something.
he indicated that 3 of the 6 cases were incomplete hangings, which you put in your report, correct?
Correct.
But he also told you that they were all males, correct?
Correct.
And he also told you that 2 of them were a bit overweight, correct?
Correct.
And then included their weight as being 110 kilograms, right?
Correct.
And you agree with me that 110 kilograms is 242 pounds.
I'll take your word for it.
It's not 110 pounds.
Correct.
We're talking about quite a significant bigger weight than that. When we're talking kilograms.
Yes, Jenny, I think that's exactly
So-
the one.
You know from reading this Sept study that age-adjusted weight is a statistically significant factor in whether or not there's going to be fractures, right?
Correct in that study.
And yet, when you wrote your summary, your case review report, you only indicated that 3 out of the 6 were incomplete hangings, right?
Correct.
You didn't know anything in your report that the author of the study told you specifically that 2 of those 3 were overweight, right?
Correct.
The author of the study didn't just stop there, though. He included the entire data set from their study, correct?
They did.
Gave you a spreadsheet that laid out their cases and their findings.
Correct.
And hand you Western March States Exhibit 167. Take one, flip it over. Do you recognize that?
It appears to be a subset of that data, including only the individuals with the bilateral hyoid and bilateral thyroid fractures.
And in the study, there were 6 such cases,
Correct.
and that is reflective of those 6 cases.
Correct.
Now this how that's to publish exhibit 167. Okay. The authors of this study from the Czech Republic, is that right?
Correct.
So fair to say some of the headings here are not in English.
Correct.
I'll walk through some of the things that are on this base. Let's start with first column, sex, M. That indicates that all 6 of the individuals that had the quadruple fracture pattern were male, correct?
Correct.
I do
Next.
that a lot, Jenny. Hit send.
Line is age, or excuse me, not line, column
Correct.
is age. Those are the ages of these individuals who had the quadruple fracture pattern.
Correct.
Next is their weight in kilograms, is that correct?
Correct.
And so
Where are you going with this?
Okay. No, argue for like 3 seconds.
That exhibit, where's that?
Oh, good, good. I have a minute. I'm doing it as quick as I can. I give you Jenny Genius.
Oh my gosh, she really is a card.
I just made that.
I love it.
You see the attacks, right?
That's awesome.
I'll send it to you guys.
Ozzy, if you're still here, you're very lucky. I've asked Comer a couple of times to make that picture only with your face. And he has been kind enough to you to not do it for me yet. But I have asked.
I'll send it to you, Bobby.
See, at the end of the day, she said that it's not impossible for this to have happened with a hanging. And
Right.
this guy's like, he's trying to catch her up in that, but he can't. And it's starting to get a little annoying now.
No, he had a plan and it was
It's-
not. No.
Yeah, it didn't happen. Now he just looks like he's badgering. Or not badgering, but like he looks like he's struggling to get an answer
going
he's
back
not
to 60,
getting.
167.
That
Mhm.
looks bad.
That column under a word that begins with H, that was their weight in kilograms, correct?
Correct.
And so let's keep going. We'll come back in a minute. Next is TIP, TYP, and then there's a couple of different numbers underneath that. See that?
Correct.
Do you know what those mean?
They refer to the knot position in the ligature.
And so you'd agree with me that 3 is a right lateral knot.
I have to refer back to see what number is what.
And we'll do that together here. I put it up here for you.
That would be great.
This is on the second page of the exhibit. Heading 2.
So yes, 3 is a right lateral hanging.
3 is right lateral.
Correct.
And 4 is left lateral.
Correct.
So 3 and 4 are going to be on the sides.
Correct.
1 and 2 is posterior and anterior. So those are going to be front and back.
1 is posterior, 2 is anterior. Correct.
And then while we're here, before we go back to the spreadsheet, A is going to be complete hangings, complete suspension, right?
Correct.
And B is going to be incomplete suspension, correct?
Correct.
So let's look at these again. The first one, case number 49, a male, 37 years of age, 242 pounds approximately, right?
Okay.
Right lateral knot, incomplete hanging.
Correct.
That individual is dissimilar from Emily Noble, correct?
Doesn't match the demographics. Yes.
Dissimilar because it's a male, not a female, right?
Correct.
Dissimilar because it's someone who weighs 242 pounds instead of 95 pounds, right?
Okay. Yes.
Dissimilar because there is a knot in the right lateral position, correct?
Since I could not view the knot with all the hair and stuff, I can't say yes or no.
So you can't say, we'll make this easier so we don't have to do it every time. You can't say on any of these whether or not the position of the knot is the same or similar to what Emily Noble had.
Correct.
Okay. So this individual is dissimilar, at least due to weight, by more than double her weight, correct?
You said this individual or
So this
these
individual,
individuals? This. Okay. Yes.
the first one, 49.
Yes.
Let's talk about 52. Again, we've got a male, correct?
Correct.
We've got somebody who weighs 242 pounds, correct?
Correct.
And we have someone who is a complete hang, correct?
Correct.
So again, this individual is dissimilar from Emily Noble by weight, correct?
Correct. Sorry.
Again,
That was a
more-
question.
More than almost 2.5 times her weight, correct?
Correct.
And a complete hanging, correct?
Correct.
The next individual, number 60. Here we have an individual who weighs 138 pounds.
I can't do kilograms to pounds on top of my head, so I will take your word on that.
And we have a complete hanging, correct?
Correct.
So again, we have an individual who weighs 30 to 40 pounds more than Emily Noble, correct?
Correct.
And the position of the hanging being complete is dissimilar, correct?
Correct.
Next line, number 84. Here we have, again, another male, correct?
Correct.
Again, somebody who's noted as weighing 242 pounds, correct?
Correct.
And an individual who is indicated to be an incomplete hanging, correct?
Correct.
So far we've talked about 2 incomplete hangings, right?
Correct.
49 and 84, correct?
Correct.
Both of those being individuals who are noted to weigh more than 240 pounds, correct?
Correct.
Again, number 84, dissimilar from Emily Noble in those characteristics, correct?
Correct.
Then we have number 98. We've got a male again, correct?
Correct.
This time 198 pounds
Sounds right.
and a complete hang, correct?
Correct.
So again, we're dealing with someone who is dissimilar because of weight, correct?
Correct.
And dissimilar because of the type of hanging, correct?
Correct.
Setting aside that there may also be dissimilarities with regard to the knot, right?
Linda, she was kneeling. She was
And then we
kneeling
have
attached to the tree.
130,
So that's why she's
Another male?
incomplete.
Correct.
171 pounds
Again, I'll take your word for that.
and an incomplete hang, correct?
Correct.
Again, we're talking about an individual who weighs 70 or 80 pounds more than Emily Noble weighed, correct?
I don't know that I knew Emily Noble's weight.
Okay.
Is it in Dr. Smock's report, her weight?
I'm sure it's in some of the materials you review, but if you don't recall it off the top of your head, that's fine.
I don't recall seeing her weight.
Okay. Just as a means of simple math, 171 pounds is 70 more pounds than 100.
Correct.
Okay. Now, ma'am, those factors that we talk about in your own study are statistically significant to whether or not we're going to see fractures, right?
It's not my own study.
I'm sorry, the study that
In
you-
this study,
The study that you
correct.
cited.
Correct.
The one you chose because you believe it supported your
bad.
conclusion, right?
In their data, they
Corresponding to
also
toy.
review a number of articles that some show weight is significant, some show weight is not significant.
That wasn't my question.
Okay.
My question is, you picked that study because you believed it supported your position that hanging could not be ruled out in this case.
Correct. Based on the fracture pattern. Correct.
And you would agree with me that that fracture pattern was only present in 3.4% of the cases that they reviewed themselves, that they performed their own autopsies, right?
Correct.
And that of those 6 cases, all of them are dissimilar from Emily Noble, right?
Correct.
Yeah, she didn't weigh all that much though, Bobby.
Also in that study, I'm going to turn to page 80.
You like
as
my
it's labeled
card?
in the top right.
Well, no, the USB cable, it's I'm thinking that's why she ended up with all 4 fractures, is because she was so small. The weight of her skull would just pull it down and
Now, I'm turning your attention to
She also lost a lot of weight.
since I placed in red brackets.
too.
Can you see
quickly.
that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so again, in the Zadapkova study, they said, in reviewing other literature, in a retrospective study comprising 632 fully autopsied cases of hanging, Tugalev et al. Failed to identify laryngeal and hyoid fractures in individuals lighter than 50 kilograms, right?
Yes.
50 kilograms being roughly 110 pounds.
Yes.
So in the Zadapkova study, they cite to another study that said there were no fractures in individuals under 110 pounds.
Correct.
I'll hand you what's marked as table 168. Take on look at. I know I've only just handed that to you, so I'm not going to ask you a ton of questions. And if you want some time to review it, please let me know. But does that appear to be the Tugalev study that was referenced in the Zadapkova study?
Correct.
So I'm going to put up what's marked in the top left is page 1502 in that particular study. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
And because I've got a different copy of it, can you confirm that what I've handed you is stays at 168 is the same thing that's up on the overhead?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that table 3 talks about the distribution of fractures by weight, correct?
Correct.
And that this isn't talking about quadruple fracture or fracture of both structures. It's talking about any fractures whatsoever, right?
Correct.
And so in this study,
Well,
you cited Zadapkova to support your conclusion. Zadapkova cites this study in their study, correct?
Correct.
And this study says in individuals under 110 pounds, there wasn't a single fracture of any kind.
In their study. Correct.
Not a one.
Correct.
And when you email one of the authors of the Zadapkova study, they pointed out to you that 2 of the incomplete hangings were overweight.
Yes. They said, interestingly, they were all males and then 2 of them were overweight.
And you know that age-adjusted weight is a statistically significant factor in whether or not you're going to find fractures.
In that one study. Correct.
And you didn't include anything about the weight of those individuals when you wrote your report, correct?
No.
I obviously didn't think it was relevant if she didn't include it.
well,
I mean,
One of the, let me ask this, the Zadapkova study, it only separated the types of hangings by complete or incomplete. Is that
Correct.
fair? Are you aware of literature that addresses differences within the subset of incomplete hangings?
What do you mean by subset?
So so we have all hangings.
Yes.
We have complete hangings, which means no part of the person is touching the ground. They're
Correct.
completely suspended. Then we have incomplete hangings, where something is touching the ground.
Correct.
Are you aware of any studies that discuss the differences in types of incomplete hanging, not as incomplete
This guy's
versus
pissing me
complete,
off.
but within the subset.
She had
of what
a
is an
bone
incomplete.
density
Not
issue
that
as
I've
well,
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed. So, and nobody seems to account for that.
Yeah, the brittle bone. I don't think it was brittle bone disease, but it had this similar effect, I believe.
Yeah, it's something osteo something. I don't recall exactly what it was, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm handing you what's the mark states at 169.
yeah, she's so over it too.
Yeah.
She has to maintain professionalism though, because the jury's also looking at it. But oh, he's terrible. He's fucking horrible. Osteopenia. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
And I mean, it was well documented. She was on medication
can
for
go
it.
whenever you
Blah blah
want.
blah.
I just want to make sure you have a chance to look at it. I know I don't want to hand you something you've never seen and start asking questions immediately. Have you had a chance to at least look at the summary of what the study's about?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that it is entitled "The Pathology of Hanging Deaths in Western Australia"?
Correct.
Yes,
And
osteopenia.
what I want is, this study was about a prospective study of 233 fatalities due to hanging in Western Australia. Is that what it reflects in the summary? And would you agree with me that on table 1 on the second page of that exhibit is a table sorting out different types of incomplete hanging?
Correct.
As to publish that second page of Exhibit 169 of the jury? Doctor, I want to again here talk about table 1.
Back.
That's labeled
Yeah,
as
no worries.
correlation of injuries to the neck structures with the type of suspension. Is that the heading of that table?
Yes.
You agree with me that table breaks down
osteoporosis if untreated. Okay.
not only incomplete and complete, but breaks out those subsets of incomplete hanging that we're talking about, right?
And I'm not a biologist, but
You would agree with me that the
I think
first
men and women
row
have
there
different
is
bone structures.
talking about individuals
Don't
who
cancel me.
were in a standing position, correct?
Correct.
And in a standing position, they indicated 26 instances of fractured thyroid cartilage, right?
Correct.
10 instances of a fractured hyoid bone, right?
Correct.
And 3 instances of both, correct?
Correct.
Again,
Doesn't
unfortunately, it doesn't tell us whether it's bilateral to both structures, so that we have 4, but we know we at least have some fracture to each one of those 2 structures.
Correct.
Going on to the next row of kneeling, they had 23 instances of kneeling in this study, correct?
Correct.
They noted 5 instances of a fractured thyroid cartilage, correct?
Correct.
And no instances of a hyoid bone fracture, correct?
Correct.
And consequently, no instances of both a hyoid and a thyroid fracture, correct?
Correct.
And as a matter of fact, the only incomplete hanging that showed any fracture of the hyoid bone was in individuals that were standing, correct?
No.
Of incomplete
Incorrect.
hangings.
Incorrect.
Of incomplete hangings.
Incorrect. There's a column, the third column says both, and there's a 1 under sitting for both.
That's true. I'm not entirely sure why. That doesn't make sense when there's not a 1 in hyoid bone.
I would imagine that the first column is thyroid cartilage only, hyoid bone only, and then both, so that the data is not double
Gotcha.
up in them.
So one instance in somebody who was not standing with a hyoid fracture.
Correct.
But again,
Yes.
not with regard to anyone who was in a kneeling position.
Correct.
Bobby Hardy needs it. It won't make it any worse.
In fact, I'm handing you, I believe you're showing this on the record. What's the mark states at II?
Correct.
don't have an ostrich penis. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
it's the Betson Eisenmenger article.
Damn it, Bobby.
Linda said she'd show you
You agree with
hers.
me
So
that what you were shown was
What the fuck?
table 1,
Correct.
and table 1 discusses fractures by age, correct?
Correct.
Would it surprise you to learn that this same document was shown to Dr. Smock when he testified?
Bobby, it's going to
Did you happen to
degen.
hear that
I
testimony?
did not.
Dr. Smock indicated
Don't
that
look,
this
anyone.
study is meaningless when compared to Emily Noble.
When compared to what? I'm sorry.
When compared to Emily Noble's situation, the situation why we're here, right?
no, Xander, I don't have
You
one.
agree with me,
And Bobby's
this
disappointed
table-
that I don't have one.
does not say a single thing about the weight of those individuals.
Correct.
You would agree with me that this table doesn't say a single thing about whether it was a complete or incomplete hanging, correct?
Correct.
You would agree with me that this table doesn't say a single thing about whether there was a knot or was not a knot and where the knot was.
Correct.
So this table that only talks
You asked for
about
it, Bobby.
age ignores those other factors that you've agreed are statistically significant for whether you're going to see fractures, right?
I agree that that article you presented had a statistically significant.
The article that you cited in support of your position said it was statistically significant, correct?
Correct. One of the articles I cited.
At
I
the
didn't
end of
choose
the
this
day, all
article, you
the
chose.
thing is she said that
And
it's
you
not
believe,
possible to
Based
rule
on
out,
your reading of
hanging.
that article,
Right.
that it
and
supported your
he's
position.
trying so hard
That
to
The
get her
bilateral
to say
hyoidine
that's not
fracture
true,
and thyroid fracture
that he's actually
can
making his
occur in
case
an
look
incomplete hanging.
worse.
Correct.
Oh, I know.
And so that's what I really want to make sure the jury understands. What that sentence that you just said means
I said
is
don't
just
look.
that theoretically
Always look, but be prepared.
those 4 fractures can occur from a hanging, right?
Correct.
That statement does not mean that those fractures occurred to Emily Noble because of a hanging, right?
I'm just saying it can't be ruled out. Correct.
Well, you're saying it can't be ruled out because, in general, a 200-pound man could have had that fracture pattern from a hanging, right?
Along with my knowledge, yes.
And there's not a single thing that you've been able to point to that talks about that fracture pattern occurring in a 100-pound female, right?
Correct.
And in fact, the study you chose to cite in your report cites another study that says there's no fractures of any kind under 110 pounds, right?
Correct.
One moment.
Do you not?
I guess I'll ask this last question just because it was asked of Dr. Smock, but are you being compensated for your time to be here?
Yes.
Were you compensated originally for your review of the case?
I
Yes.
am one hell of
Compensated
a
for your travel to
researcher.
Ohio?
Like I just made 2
It was-
Pokemon
my travel
cards
was
in
covered. I
5
didn't pay
minutes.
for it. So
Like,
And what's the rate at which you're being compensated hourly for this?
for testimony and trial is $300 an
I
hour.
thought
while
you know
testifying.
it does.
Okay, no further questions.
Have those exhibits, please.
Just make sure she says it before we play the game.
So now we're on recross or
Redirect.
redirect. There you go.
I'll just start where it was left off, showing you what's in State's Exhibit 169. That article is 1996. Do you see that?
Correct.
And I'll call it the Z study that you cite in your report. Is dated what?
2018.
Tell us how technology has evolved from 1996 to 2018 in terms of what researchers and people in science like yourself can see and now know. What's changed from 96 to 2018?
Well, one of the things that the Zedapkova et al. Article brings up in their long table of all the reviews of
It's not
studies
over yet.
is that they ordered them by percentage of fractures to the hyoid and thyroid card for lowest to greatest. And they indicate in there how the top half with the lowest amount of fractures occurring in the hangings were the older articles, and the bottom half was the newer articles. Because procedures have changed, we have better imaging, we have CT scans, doing more detailed dissections of those structures, and are doing more prospective studies, so studies that are actually designed to look for these things.
And between the study in 18, obviously 2018, we have my math is 22 years separate those two articles. Now, I want to go back to Defendant's Exhibit QQ because so much of it was asked about weight. Would you agree with me that page 80 of that same study?
Can you remind me what study this one is?
Oh, okay. How do I say
Zadikova?
Zadikova.
That's how I have pronounced it.
You were asked about, let me scooch this up. This sentence right here with respect to 50 kilograms. Do you remember being asked about that sentence?
Yes.
I just want to go, though, right down to the highlighted point in that same paragraph. In contrast, what does that sentence say?
It says, in contrast, Luke et al. Demonstrated that laryngohyoid fractures were independent of height and weight in a prospective study of 61 hanging cases.
Anyways.
No.
Is
OJ
there
didn't do
seemingly
it.
disagreement?
He ordered it. He paid for it. And he watched it, but he did not actually do it, in my
I
opinion.
could see that. Yeah.
Absolutely. The Zadikova article starts off by indicating they're doing this large review because it is so contradictory in the literature. You can see everything from laryngohyoid fractures happening in hangings from 0% to 100%, depending on the article that you look at.
And I know you've been asked about one of the articles within the Zadikova article. If you recall, how many articles were reviewed by that 2018 study?
I would need to look at the article.
If I could approach, Your Honor. Showing a witness what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit QQ.
You see his other post. He said, "What the hell's happening here?" And I just said, "Ostrich penis." That's exactly what's happening here.
Mm-hmm. That is a very oddly shaped penis.
Isn't it weird?
Yeah. I mean, I thought this corkscrew on a duck was odd, but that's
I was kind of expecting something
So
duckish.
I feel like the quickest way is looking at the two tables.
I
They
was
summarize
ready for
where
it.
the table 6 lists 54 studies, and table 5 lists 28. So 54 plus 28.
82. So you were asked on cross-examination about one of the studies contained therein, and there's 81 other studies that are
It's not the
encompassed
first
the
time in this
2018
chat
Zadikova
either.
study.
You just said 82 and then 81.
Because I'm taking out the one that
Oh, right.
the stage test. I want to shift gears to a question you were asked about. Dr. Smock said that this study, marked as II, Defendant's Exhibit II, was quote unquote meaningless. You recognize this study?
Yes,
And it is published in the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology.
correct.
Would you ever tell the jury, make the statement as a forensic anthropologist who's board certified, that any study published in the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology is quote unquote meaningless?
Regardless of what journal was published in, I don't think I would use the term meaningless.
I want to, just for sake of completion, the exhibit you were shown is to the emails. Why did you reach out to the author of the study?
Because I was finding it difficult to find an article that specified the exact 4 fractures and had the incomplete hanging that was referenced in Dr. Schmock's report.
And this email correspondence that you were given, it was attached to, if I may approach, Your Honor, a significant amount of data with respect to the,
Yes, they sent me their whole data file from their study.
if I can mark that as Defendant's Exhibit RR, the author actually sent you all of the data of the study, did he not?
Correct.
And does this appear to be a true and accurate copy of the data that was attached?
Yes, it prints weird because it's an Excel file.
This is the last page of the mark. Thank you. This email correspondence is done on what date?
September 20th, 2021.
And what date is your report issued?
September 21st, 2021.
So before your report is issued, you are reaching out to authors of articles to get additional information.
Correct.
Let's
Doing
talk
their
about because let's talk about Dr. Smock's report. Do you recall at all any mention even of Emily's weight in Dr. Smock's report?
I do not recall.
Do you recall any mention of his findings with respect to the bilateral fractures being consistent with manual strangulation being based on her weight?
No.
Do you recall any of his findings and conclusions in his report being based on anything to do with Emily's weight?
I would want to reread. I don't recall. I don't believe so, but
And tell me this then, with respect to Dr. Smock's, and I have this report if you'd like to refresh. Do you recall at all if he even cited one reference, one citation, one article, any literature to support what he wrote in Exhibit 148?
he did not.
Not one.
Not one.
Ooh.
Oops.
Ooh.
Just another point about incomplete versus complete and weight. When I'm here on incomplete, my weight is supported by the ground. When I'm kneeling, is my weight supported by the ground?
Correct. It's going through your vertebral column and through your knees at that point.
And when I'm hanging in a complete suicide and the ligature is holding me up, there's nothing supporting my weight?
The definition of a complete hanging would be full suspension.
And the weight of a person's skull, just variably, what can a skull weigh?
Generally reported to be 10 to 12, well, with the soft tissue and everything,
Yes.
10 to 12 pounds on average.
And if I'm 100 pounds, what might my skull weigh versus a 260-pound male?
I don't know that answer.
Okay. And so generally the weight of a skull is 10 to 12?
Correct.
You were
It's
asked
the skull with all the soft tissue, the head.
the head, 10 to 12 pounds. And if you recall, how is the head positioned in the photographs in this case?
I believe it's down and it's off to one of the sides
And it's
at the time of recovery.
You were asked about the word definitive.
Correct.
As you use definitive in your line of work, tell the jurors what it means.
So I do that frequently in my reports to say that there is no definitive evidence of trauma, right? Any kind of perimortem evidence should be definitive if you're going to report it as perimortem evidence.
And so it is the use of definitive inconsistent with your conclusion that there is no evidence of perimortem trauma on the nasal area?
No.
It is not.
No.
And explain to the jurors, you kept saying anthropologically post perimortem trauma. What does that mean versus when you were asked just perimortem trauma?
I like to qualify that it's anthropologically because I'm an anthropologist. And again, that time period where the bone will retain its fresh components is a much longer perimortem period than what's normally referred to by forensic pathologists with the soft tissue.
And that period, perimortem for forensic anthropologists is what?
It is when the bone continues to retain its fresh biomechanical properties.
You were asked the questions about the ligature, that it has to be as large as the distance between the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage. And you disagreed and you weren't asked why. Could you explain to the jurors why you disagreed with that statement?
Well, you have the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage, and you have a ligament attaching them. You also have suprahyoid muscles and infrahyoid muscles. And with that hyoid bone being right there, if you were to press on the horns of the hyoid bone up here, you can create a fracture down there. You don't always get the fracture right where the force is being applied to.
And also, just so we're understanding distance, for a woman that would
Makes
be
sense.
5 feet tall, if you could show with your fingers what might be the distance, and I understand every person is different, but just generally what might be the difference between the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage.
I don't think I'd be comfortable doing that. Just
Okay.
each individual variation.
Okay, and obviously the variation, we have the size of the neck.
Oh, she has
that varies as
credibility,
well as,
too?
the
Damn.
separation of those two areas.
I know, right?
You were asked a lot of questions about the knot and studies that that talked about the knot. Were there any pictures in all of what you reviewed that actually showed the underneath when the ligature was still around her neck?
No.
The pictures, were there any pictures, they're all taken on, of her remains, were they just all taken on one day, that being September 16th?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'll rephrase the question. Of all the photographs you saw from either the scene or the coroner's office, were you ever able to get a shot, or was there a photo that you saw that actually showed the ligature under her neck?
No.
Geez, I wonder why that was.
Yeah. Could have been because the photographer sucked. The cops sucked. They all
You were
sucked.
asked about
Guy
your conclusion
sliced
with
into it
respect
3
that
different times,
the
and then they showed
bilateral
2
fractures.
different chords.
Right.
Given the bilateral
completely
fractures
different
of the
chords.
hyoid and the
Yeah.
thyroid, that a hanging could not be excluded.
Correct.
After all the cross-examination, hearing testimony, all the work that you've done in this case, which is in your report, your review, and even your own research, has your opinion in any way changed?
No.
Nothing further.
So it is possible that she could have done that with a hanging. Yes. And we've spent how much time on this?
Hours. 5 hours of
Garvin.
trial time, I
I'm
think.
going to talk about defendant exhibit
Jeez.
II for a moment.
Aye,
I
aye.
guess I'll apologize to the authors of the study. Clearly, what I'm talking about, this article being meaningless.
I'm sorry, I don't know which article.
I'm sorry, let me give it back.
Jeez. I'm sorry.
God,
I'm
he's
sorry.
such
I'm sorry. You're sounding like Canadians who are pissed off at each other. Come on now.
He is. He's being kind of a bitch right
So
now.
defense exhibit
Yeah.
II, the one you were asked about, Dr. Smock calling it meaningless. You would agree with me that our role in this courtroom is for the jury to be able to determine the facts of what happened to Emily Noble, right?
Correct.
And that none of us in this courtroom care about a hypothetical discussion of whether or not any possible hanging can cause a quadruple fracture, right?
Incorrect.
What we're here about
Exactly.
is whether this individual's injuries were caused by a hanging, right?
Correct. Or in my case, could be caused by.
And so in defense exhibit II, it contains none of the factors beyond just saying age and fracture pattern, correct?
Correct.
And so it ignores the statistically significant factors that may differentiate those cases from Emily Noble.
Some studies find those factors significant. Some studies don't.
Right.
So I'm not comfortable saying overall.
And would you mind telling the jury what year that study's from?
1996.
I hope the technology hasn't changed too much for that one for defense.
Oh,
exhibit
shut up,
II
you
to be
ass.
Used by the defense.
Jesus, this guy's
You
such a
asshat.
dick.
Now, you testified that you've spent 50 hours reviewing materials, that kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Now he really looks like
If
an
you had
ass.
found
Yeah.
a single instance
He was annoying
Any of
before,
the
but now
literature.
he's a jerk.
Mhm.
of a 100-pound female, incomplete hanging, with that quadruple fracture pattern, you most certainly would have brought it to court with you, right?
Yes, I didn't know the weight, but yes.
But the fact of the matter is, that literature doesn't exist that you've been able to locate, right?
That I have been able to locate. Correct.
And so what you did is write your report based on a study
No, he's not strong enough to be a
that has
Richard.
individuals that are not similarly situated to Emily Noble, right?
And the knowledge that there is
He's an
not
Anthony.
specific fracture
Not a
pattern
Tony, but
to
an
indicate
Anthony.
that something has to be manual strangulation.
See, I was gonna start
Are
saying
you
names,
familiar with the
but
phrase
then I
garbage
might,
in, garbage out?
Yes.
might piss people off. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I
refrain.
just realized that. I'm sorry. I do know Anthony's, and they're not dickish like
Write 'em now
this.
or
So I do
totally?
apologize.
Napoleon. Yeah, we can call him Dick. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm not going to. Yeah. That's as far as I'm going to go. So
Okay.
in Ohio, the jury gets to ask the witness questions.
Mhm.
So
I
the
love
jury
that.
poses. Yeah. Oh no, it's fantastic. So the jury poses questions. They go to the attorneys. The attorneys confer with the judge, and then the judge asks the questions from the jury to the witness. So it's really cool.
Mhm.
And I think it's a really good idea. So
I have a few questions from the jury. I will ask the questions to you. Why did you not review the bones in person?
When I was contacted by the defense with these materials, I had assumed that the bones had been returned to the family and were interred or cremated at that time. It wasn't made aware to me until about 2 weeks ago, that the remains were still available.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to review Emily's medical history to see if she had any antemortem defects to her face or neck prior to the day she went missing?
I did get to review her medical history looking for fracture patterns. From the medical history, it noted the ankle fractures and then a fracture to the elbow, but that's all I saw within the records that were sent to me.
You emailed the author of one of the learned treatises and for more information. Why did you choose not to do that with Dr. Agnew regarding her findings of work?
It would seem inappropriate when counsel is asking you to review materials for a report to then go to that person that you're reviewing the report and ask them for more information about that. You don't correspond with them. That would be something that would have to go through the counsel.
Do any of the studies, and we've talked about many learned treatises about hangings, include cases of incomplete hangings where the individual remained in the hanging position for an extended period of time?
Aaron, you got it.
Some of the studies noted that they actually excluded cases that were out for prolonged periods so that there's not any confounding factors, and others did not specify.
Are the bones of a slightly built woman more fragile than a very sturdy man?
That is difficult to answer. There's a lot of things that's going to go into whether your bones will fracture more than somebody else's. You could have a man and woman of the same size, but one has osteoporosis, right? Or one has metabolic disease, or even activity. The more you do, your bones actually get thicker in response to the force, or even your activity differences. So you really can't say just because of body size that bones would be more fragile or not.
Is it possible that someone who started in a kneeling position over a significant period of time could end up sitting in terms of hanging?
I hesitate. I'm not sure if I should be answering this from a forensic anthropological sense of things. But anytime you have decomposition, that soft tissue that is originally there is going to disappear. So you're going to get a change in position with the decomposition that's occurring.
In a study where 3.4% suffered 4 fractures, were any of these cases identified or tested for bone mass density loss?
That was not in the study.
Is the integrity of bones degraded if submerged in hydrogen peroxide/water solution for up to 24 hours?
Diane's been great.
There aren't studies that tested the exact 1-to-1 ratio with 2% hydrogen peroxide for 24 hours as was used in this case. But multiple studies suggest that hydrogen peroxide, because of its destructive nature, should not be used in forensic cases. It's used when curating bones, because if you're building a collection, you want less greasy and whiter remains. But in forensics, we try to do the minimal possible to be able to analyze the bones.
Would use of hydrogen peroxide solution potentially cause fractures in the neck?
I would say it would not cause fractures. It can change the bone density, but it wouldn't create. It's not applying a load or a force to create a fracture.
Could you or anyone see signs of plastic deformation on the nose in photos of Emily from May 24th? Photos of her on May 24th.
So, as a forensic anthropologist, I wouldn't be looking at making diagnoses off of her face. I don't know if I can speak to my observation in Smock's study as just a critical analytical person.
Go ahead and answer the question.
Okay. In the one image that is within Dr. Smock's report, to me, it does look like there's deviation to the nose, but I don't have anything else to say to that.
Are you able to tell how long ago an antemortem nasal fracture occurred?
So you can't say specifically. Healing is going to vary. It's going to vary person to person, and it's going to vary on severity. It's going to vary on your health, and it's going to vary on your age. A lot of the studies looking at bone healing deal with infant abuse cases. And so we know as far as infant abuse cases, first of all, infants heal a lot faster than adults. And that healing process, the first time that you'd see gross macroscopic laying down of new bone would be at least 4 days, usually more like a week or 10 days. And that bone that's laid down is a woven bone. It's haphazard. Your body wants to stabilize that. So it just throws the bone down quickly, along with some cartilage, and then it goes back and remodels it to make it nice and smooth like the rest of the bone. The nasal images are all nice and smooth, and they're stable. They're on top of one another there. So I would say at least a couple weeks, but you really can't put an end range on that.
Changing gears again, what is age-adjusted weight?
So age-adjusted weight would mean that statistically they took out the influence of age first and then looked at weight of that individual.
And why is that necessary to know in an evaluation?
So the authors did not find that weight alone was a significant factor. They did find that age was a significant factor. So if they take into account age, a 62-year-old person of this and a 62-year-old person of that, would weight matter? And they did find in that one study a statistically significant influence.
Does the Z study, which you were reviewing, Exhibit QQ, include the thickness of the ligature in the data?
They don't in the data, but they do reference ligature thickness in parts of their review, indicating that rigid and narrower ligatures tended to cause more trauma.
Could the use of hydrogen peroxide on bones make peri-mortem damage appear to be post-mortem damage?
Could it create peri-mortem to look like post-mortem?
Good question.
Not that direction, but the other direction, right? Because post-mortem, you're looking at the color changes. And so if you bleach the bones, all of a sudden then those color changes are gone and you don't have that information. But I can't think of a way where it would make a peri-mortem fracture look post-mortem.
Thank you. Questions?
Nothing further.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You are excused.
All right, and we are going to cut it right there for this evening.
All right.
It gets a little fiery. They have a conversation after this, and there's some comments going every which way, to the point where the next day the judge has to open up with an apology to parties and all kinds of stuff. So it gets a little heated.
Oh,
I think
fun.
this is the one where Wish.com Wolverine just walks out very aggressively. It's fun. It'll be fun to watch. So
Oh, looking forward to that. Yeah.
yeah, so that's what we got coming up next week. And tomorrow, Digger and I have a new show.
Yay.
Yay!
Yeah.
We're doing the 9/11 one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we're gonna touch on John Cooper. Is it John? William
Oh, yeah.
Cooper.
Bill. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know why the hell John was in my mind, but Bill Cooper and some of his kind of the ways he did things and kind of, I hate to say predict things, but the way he knew about some things coming. So it'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, other than that, and then we'll pick this up next Monday,
Mhm.
and we should be able to get through day 6 and a little bit of day 7 next week. So,
Nice.
but yeah,
Well, thanks for
yeah.
having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Anything to add?
No, I'm looking forward to tomorrow, though.
Yeah, I am as well. So, she was an excellent witness. She was very much so.
Yeah.
But all right, thanks as always for watching. Please hit that like on your way out, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good night, everybody.